Welcome, dear listener, to a quieter path through the halls of Hogwarts, where not every story is told in triumph. Tonight, we follow the life of a boy shaped not by glory, but by absence, by expectation, and by a pain that began long before he could understand it. As you settle into stillness, let the rhythm of this story guide you gently forward, through childhood memories, through classrooms filled with quiet fear, through moments where courage was found in the smallest act. Now, close your eyes and let us begin where this story first took root, in a world already shadowed. Long before he ever stepped into the halls of Hogwarts, before spells were spoken or fears were given shape, the name Neville Longbottom already carried a quiet weight. It was a name known within certain circles of the wizarding world, spoken with respect, sometimes with admiration, and always with the understanding that it belonged to a family that had chosen a difficult path. The Longbottoms were not famous in the way that drew attention or celebration. They did not seek the spotlight, nor did they build their legacy on spectacle. Instead, their reputation had been formed through steady service, through quiet acts of courage that rarely made their way into stories told to children. They were known as reliable, as principled, as people who did what was necessary even when it was not easy. At the center of that reputation stood Frank and Alice Longbottom, two Aurors who had dedicated their lives to protecting others during one of the most uncertain periods in modern magical history. They were young, but already trusted, with responsibilities that carried real danger. The war that surrounded them was not always visible, not always loud, but it was constant. It moved through shadows, through whispers, through choices made behind closed doors. To be an Auror during that time meant living with a quiet awareness that any day might not end the way it began. It meant understanding that the line between safety and loss could be crossed without warning. Frank and Alice accepted that reality without hesitation. They did not speak of it often, but it shaped everything they did. When Neville was born, the world he entered was already marked by that tension. It was not a peaceful beginning, though it was filled with the same small joys that accompany any new life. There were quiet evenings, soft conversations, the careful routines that form around a child's earliest days. For a time, those moments existed without interruption, held gently against the wider uncertainty of the world beyond their home. His grandmother, Augusta Longbottom, watched closely even then. She carried herself with a firm presence, her expectations rarely spoken aloud but always understood. To her, family was not only about affection but about responsibility. The Longbottom name meant something, and that meaning was to be upheld. It was not a burden she believed should be questioned. It was simply the way things were. In those early years, Neville would not have understood any of this. He would not have known the weight of his name, or the quiet admiration others held for his parents. He would not have recognized the subtle shift in tone when their work was mentioned, or the way conversations sometimes paused when certain subjects came too close to the surface. But the foundation was already being laid. His parents, though often occupied with their duties, brought a sense of calm into the home whenever they were present. Frank carried a steady warmth, a kind of quiet humor that softened the edges of even the most serious conversations. Alice, thoughtful and observant, had a way of noticing small details that others overlooked. Together, they created a space that felt stable, even when the world beyond it was anything but. They did not speak to Neville of war. They did not explain the nature of the danger that surrounded them. Instead, they offered him the simple things that all children receive without question: familiar voices, gentle reassurance, the sense that he was safe, that he was cared for, and for a time, that was enough. But outside their home, the world was changing. The influence of Voldemort had begun to spread, not always openly, but with a growing certainty. Fear moved quietly through the magical community, shaping decisions, altering behaviors, drawing lines between those who resisted and those who did not. The work of Aurors became more dangerous, more urgent, more consuming. Frank and Alice were among those who stood firmly against that darkness. They did not step back. They did not choose easier paths. And in doing so, they became part of something larger than themselves, something that would eventually reach far beyond their own lives. The Longbottom name, once simply associated with reliability and quiet strength, began to carry a different kind of meaning. It became tied to resistance, to defiance, to the idea that some people would stand their ground no matter the cost. Neville, still too young to understand, grew within that reality. There were small signs, though they would only be recognized much later. Moments where conversations ended too quickly when he entered the room, letters that arrived and were read in silence, occasional absences that stretched longer than expected. These were not unusual enough to draw attention from a child, but they formed a pattern, subtle and persistent. Augusta noticed more than she said. Her gaze lingered longer, her posture more rigid when certain topics arose. She believed in strength, in endurance, in the idea that weakness was something to be corrected rather than comforted. To her, Neville's future was already defined. He would grow into the legacy he had been given. There was no alternative. Expectations settled around him long before he could carry it. Yet in those earliest days, he remained simply a child, observing without understanding, absorbing without question, existing in the quiet space between what was known and what had yet to be revealed. The world had already begun to shape him, even before he had taken his first steps within it. And though nothing had yet been lost, though no moment of breaking had arrived, the path ahead was already narrowing, guiding him slowly, almost gently, toward a future that would ask more of him than he could ever have imagined. The world Neville had been born into did not shift all at once. It changed slowly, almost quietly, as if the darkness spreading through it preferred not to be noticed. At first, it was little more than a feeling, a hesitation in conversation. A glance held a moment too long. Doors that were once left open, now closed with care. The first Wizarding War had already begun to take shape long before Neville could understand what war meant. It did not look like the battles described in old stories. There were no clear lines, no single place where it could be seen in full. Instead, it moved through lives in fragments, a disappearance here, a whispered name there, families altered without explanation. For those like Frank and Alice Longbottom, the war was not distant, it was constant. Their work as Aurors placed them at the center of it, where decisions had to be made quickly and consequences rarely revealed themselves fully until it was too late. They followed leads that led nowhere. They pursued figures who vanished before they could be caught. They lived in a world where trust was uncertain, and certainty itself became something fragile. Voldemort's influence grew not through loud declarations, but through fear. His followers moved in shadows, their loyalty shaped by belief or by terror, sometimes both. They did not need to be seen to be understood. Their presence was felt in the way people spoke more carefully, in the way certain subjects were avoided entirely. The Longbottom home, though still a place of warmth, began to carry that quiet tension within it. Frank returned from work with a thoughtful silence that lingered longer than it once had. Alice, though steady, seemed to listen more closely to the world beyond their walls, as if expecting something she could not yet name. Neville would have noticed only fragments of this. A pause before an answer, a hand placed gently on his shoulder, held there just a moment longer than necessary. The way his parents looked at each other sometimes, not with fear, but with an understanding that required no words. There were nights when Frank did not return until very late, and mornings when he left before the house had fully woken. Alice remained composed, maintaining the rhythm of the home, but the quiet between her actions spoke of a mind that never fully rested. The war did not allow for stillness. As Voldemort's power strengthened, his followers became more emboldened. Acts that once would have been unthinkable began to occur with increasing frequency. Families were targeted, individuals disappeared. Some returned, changed, and others did not return at all. Frank and Alice did not step away from their work. If anything, they leaned further into it. They believed, as many did, that resistance was necessary, that allowing fear to dictate action would only give more power to the darkness they were trying to contain. But resistance came with a cost. Their names became known not just within the ministry, but beyond it. Among those who opposed Voldemort, they were respected. Among those who followed him, they were marked. This was not something spoken aloud within their home. It was not a truth that could be explained to a child who still understood the world in simple terms, but it existed, quietly, shaping the direction of their lives. Neville grew within that reality, unaware of how close danger had already come. To him, the world was still defined by familiar things: the sound of voices in the next room, the steady presence of his grandmother, the sense, however fragile, that home was a place where nothing truly harmful could reach him. But outside those walls, lines were being drawn. The fall of Voldemort, when it came, was sudden and incomplete. News traveled quickly, though it was not always clear or consistent. There were reports of his disappearance, of his defeat, of something that had broken the war in a way few had expected. For many, it brought relief, a sense that the long tension might finally ease. But for others, the end did not feel like an ending. The followers who remained did not vanish. Some attempted to hide. Others clung to their beliefs with even greater intensity, refusing to accept that the cause they had devoted themselves to could simply dissolve. Among them were those who had given everything to Voldemort, who had shaped their identities around his power, and who could not imagine a world without it. It was within that uncertainty that the final act of violence against the Longbottom family took place. The Lestrangers, along with others who had remained loyal to Voldemort even after his fall, sought answers. They believed he had not truly been defeated, that he had only been hidden, and that those who had opposed him might know where he could be found. Frank and Alice, as Aurors deeply involved in the war, became targets of that belief. They were taken not as soldiers in battle, but as individuals to be broken. What followed was not a confrontation in the traditional sense. It was not a fight that could be won or lost through strength or skill. It was something quieter, more deliberate, and far more destructive. Neville would not remember the moment itself. He would not see what happened, nor hear the words that were spoken. But the consequences would shape everything that came after. The war, which had once existed as something distant and abstract, had reached into his life in the most personal way possible. And though the world outside might begin to recover, to rebuild, to move forward, the damage done within his family would not follow the same path. Some endings do not bring closure. They simply leave behind a silence that cannot be filled. There are some spells in the wizarding world that are taught carefully, explained with caution, and practiced only within strict boundaries. And then there are others that are never meant to be used at all, except by those who have already crossed a line that cannot be undone. Among these, there exists a curse that does not simply harm the body, but reaches deeper, unraveling something far more fragile. The Cruciatus curse was not designed to kill. That, in its own way, made it more terrible. It was created to cause pain, not as a side effect, but as its only purpose. Pure, focused suffering, sustained for as long as the caster willed it. There were no visible wounds left behind, no scars that could be easily seen or healed, but the damage it caused did not fade with time. For most, even the thought of such magic was enough to bring discomfort. It belonged to a category of spells known as unforgivable, not because they were difficult to perform, but because of what they required from the one who cast them. To use the Cruciatus curse properly, one had to mean it. One had to desire the pain they were inflicting. It was not enough to speak the words or move a wand. The intention had to be real. For Frank and Alice Longbottom, that reality became something they could not escape. They were held not for information alone, but for demonstration. The Lestranges, driven by belief and by desperation, sought answers that did not exist. When those answers were not given, the curse was used again and again, not in a moment of anger, but with a patience that made it more deliberate, more controlled. Time, in such circumstances, loses its usual meaning. What might have been minutes could stretch into something far longer, defined not by the passing of hours, but by the repetition of pain. There was no opportunity to recover, no moment where the mind could settle. Each wave of the curse built upon the last, eroding the boundary between thought and sensation. The human mind is not built to endure that without consequence. There comes a point where the distinction between external pain and internal experience begins to blur, where memory fragments, not as a single break, but as a gradual unraveling. The things that define a person, their sense of self, their ability to hold on to who they are, begin to loosen under that pressure. For Frank and Alice, that point was past. When they were finally found, when the curse had ceased and silence returned, what remained of them was not what had been taken. Their bodies still lived, their hearts still beat, but the connection between who they had been and what they had become had been severed. They were not unconscious, they were not asleep, but they were no longer fully present in the way they once had been. Their thoughts no longer followed clear paths. Their memories, once steady and ordered, had become scattered, unreachable. The damage could not be undone. Healers at St. Mungo's understood the nature of magical injury better than most. They had seen curses that twisted limbs, potions that altered the body in unexpected ways, spells that left lingering effects long after they were cast. But this was different. The Cruciatus curse, when used to such an extent, did not leave something that could be repaired. It left absence. There were attempts, of course, careful treatments, quiet observation, efforts made not with expectation, but with a sense of duty. But over time, a quiet understanding settled among those who watched over them. They would not recover. For Neville, too young to remember the moment itself, this reality would not arrive all at once. It would come slowly, through visits, through small interactions that did not align with what he was told his parents had once been. He would see them, he would stand in the same room, hear their voices, watch their movements, but something would always feel distant, just out of reach. They would look at him, but not quite see him. They would speak, but not in ways that connected to the present. The people he was meant to know existed only in stories told by others. The war, for many, had ended. The danger that once spread across the wizarding world had begun to recede. There was talk of rebuilding, of moving forward, of returning to something resembling normal life. But for the Longbottom family, there was no clear division between before and after. The consequences of the curse did not fade with the passing of time. They remained steady and unchanged, a quiet reminder of what had been taken and what could not be restored. And within that stillness, Neville's life would begin to take shape, not around the presence of his parents, but around the space they could no longer fill. There is a difference between losing someone completely and losing them in a way that leaves them still present, still breathing, still reachable in the most physical sense, but no longer able to return what is given. For Neville, this distinction shaped the earliest memories he would come to understand. Not as a single moment of realization, but as a quiet pattern that repeated itself over time. St. Mungo's hospital for magical maladies and injuries stood apart from the ordinary flow of the wizarding world. It was a place where time seemed to move more slowly, where conversations were softer, and where the boundaries between healing and acceptance were often unclear. The corridors carried a stillness that was not quite silence, filled instead with distant sounds that never fully resolved into anything comforting. Neville's visits there began early, though at first they would have held little meaning. He was brought by his grandmother, guided through halls that smelled faintly of potions and polished stone, past doors that remained closed, and others that revealed brief glimpses of patients whose conditions could not be easily explained. When they reached the room where his parents stayed, there was no sense of anticipation in the way one might expect. No eager recognition waiting on the other side. Instead, there was a kind of quiet uncertainty, as though each visit existed outside the normal expectations of what a family reunion should be. Frank and Alice Longbottom were there, as they always were, but their presence did not carry the same warmth that others might have taken for granted. They moved, they spoke, but their actions were disconnected from the moment in front of them. Their eyes did not focus in a way that suggested understanding. Their words, when they came, followed patterns that seemed to belong to a different time entirely. Neville would stand near them, sometimes closer, sometimes at a distance, depending on how his grandmother guided him. He would watch them carefully, searching without knowing he was searching, waiting for something that would confirm what he had been told, that these were his parents, that they knew him, that there was something shared between them beyond the simple fact of being in the same room. But that confirmation did not come. Instead, there were small gestures that carried meaning in ways that were difficult to explain. Alice, on some visits, would press something into his hand, a sweet wrapper folded with care as though it was something valuable. She would offer it with a quiet insistence, her expression distant but gentle. Neville, not understanding, would look to his grandmother for guidance. Her voice firm, her posture unchanged, but her eyes holding something that suggested this moment mattered more than it appeared. Over time, these small exchanges became part of the pattern. They did not change, did not grow into something larger, but they remained a repetition that carried a quiet weight, even if Neville could not yet fully grasp it. There were no conversations in the way others might have known them. No shared stories, no questions asked and answered, no laughter that connected one moment to the next. The visits existed in fragments, each one separate from the last, each one ending without a clear sense of completion. For a child, this created a kind of confusion that did not announce itself. Neville did not question it openly. He accepted what he was shown, what he was told, and built his understanding around those pieces, even when they did not quite fit together. He knew these were his parents. He understood that something had happened to them, something that could not be fixed. But the emotional connection that might have formed naturally was interrupted before it could fully take shape. In its place was a quiet absence. Augusta Longbottom maintained control of these visits with a careful precision. She did not allow them to become overly long, nor did she permit Neville to linger in ways that might deepen his confusion. There was a structure to it, a beginning and an end that she adhered to without deviation. To her, this was necessary. There were things that could not be explained to a child, and things that were better understood through experience rather than words. She believed that Neville would come to understand in time, that the truth would settle into him gradually, as it had for her. But understanding does not always bring comfort. As Neville grew older, the differences between his experience and that of other children began to take on a clearer shape. He would hear others speak of their parents with a kind of familiarity that he did not share. Stories filled with detail, with shared moments, with a sense of continuity that extended beyond a single room in a quiet hospital. He did not have those stories. What he had were images, the steady hum of the hospital corridors, the way his grandmother's hand rested firmly on his shoulder, the soft, repetitive actions of his parents, disconnected from the present but carried out with a strange consistency. And always, the feeling that something important was missing, though he could not yet name what it was. There were moments, small and fleeting, where something almost seemed to reach through, a glance that lingered slightly longer, a movement that felt almost intentional. But these moments never held long enough to become something certain. They appeared, and then they were gone, leaving behind only the question of whether they had been real at all. The visits continued, unchanged. They did not become easier, nor did they become more difficult in any obvious way. They simply existed, part of the rhythm of Neville's life, shaping his understanding of family in a way that was quiet but deeply rooted. For him, the idea of connection would always carry this uncertainty. The sense that presence did not always mean recognition, that being near someone did not guarantee that they truly saw you. And in that quiet space, between what was there and what was not, Neville's earliest sense of loss began to take form. In the absence of his parents, Neville's world narrowed to a single guiding presence. Augusta Longbottom did not step into the role gently, nor did she attempt to replace what had been lost with softness. She filled the space with certainty, with structure, with a kind of strength that did not bend easily. Her home was orderly, not in a way that invited comfort, but in a way that left little room for uncertainty. Everything had its place. Everything had a purpose. Even silence carried meaning, shaped by expectation rather than emptiness. For Augusta, life was something to be managed carefully, especially when so much had already fallen beyond control. She did not speak often of Frank and Alice in emotional terms. Their absence was not something to be dwelled upon, but something to be understood. They had been strong, capable, worthy of respect. That, to her, was what mattered, and that was what Neville was expected to remember. From an early age, he became aware that he was being measured against something he could not fully see. The stories he heard about his parents were not told as gentle recollections, but as quiet reminders. His father had been brave, his mother had been gifted. Together, they had stood firm when others had faltered. These were not simply facts, they were standards. Augusta did not intend cruelty. In her mind, she was offering guidance, providing Neville with a clear understanding of where he came from and what that should mean for who he would become. She believed that strength was something that could be shaped, that expectation, when held firmly enough, could guide a person toward it. But expectation, when carried without balance, can become something else. Neville, still forming his sense of self, did not yet have the ability to separate what was asked of him from what he was able to give. He listened carefully, he observed. He tried, in small ways, to match what was described to him, but each attempt felt uncertain, as though he were reaching for something that remained just beyond his grasp. There were moments when Augusta's gaze lingered on him with a quiet intensity, not unkind, but searching, as though she were looking for signs that had yet to appear. These moments were never accompanied by harsh words. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The silence itself carried enough weight. He learned quickly that approval, when it came, was subtle. A slight nod, a pause that lasted just long enough to suggest that something had been done correctly. But more often, there was only neutrality, an absence of reaction that left him uncertain whether he had succeeded or simply avoided failure. This uncertainty settled into him slowly. In other homes, affection might have been expressed more openly. Encouragement given freely, mistakes softened by reassurance. In Augusta's care, affection existed, but it was not easily seen. It was carried in actions rather than words, in the way she ensured he was provided for, in the consistency of the routines she maintained. But for a child, these forms of care are not always enough to fill the spaces left by absence. Neville began to internalize the idea that something within him was lacking. Not in a way that could be easily named, but in a quiet, persistent sense that he was not yet what he was meant to be. That there was a version of himself expected to emerge, and that he had not yet found it. Augusta noticed his hesitation, his careful movements, the way he seemed to hold himself back. She encouraged him to be stronger, to stand taller, to show the confidence she believed he must possess. But confidence does not grow easily in uncertain ground. Each attempt to meet her expectations was shaped by the fear of falling short, and that fear, though quiet, began to define the way he approached the world. He became cautious, measuring his actions before taking them, as though any misstep might confirm what he already suspected, that he was not enough. There were occasional visits from extended family, moments where the Longbottom name carried recognition beyond the walls of Augusta's home. These interactions were polite, structured, filled with the same quiet formality that defined much of Neville's life. He was introduced not simply as himself, but as the son of Frank and Alice. The name came first, the identity followed. He accepted this without question, though he did not yet understand what it meant. He carried the name as it had been given to him, without fully knowing how to hold its weight. Augusta ensured that he was taught the fundamentals expected of a wizarding child, not with indulgence, but with precision. There were lessons, small and controlled, designed to prepare him for the future she believed awaited him. She watched closely, noting his progress, adjusting her approach when necessary. But beneath it all, there remained a quiet concern she did not voice openly: the absence of clear magical ability. In families like the Longbottoms, magic was not something uncertain. It was expected to appear naturally, to reveal itself without hesitation. For Neville, it did not come so easily. His early years passed without the signs that might have reassured those around him. Augusta did not panic. She did not allow fear to take hold, but her watchfulness sharpened, her attention more focused, as though waiting for something that had been delayed, but not denied. Neville, though he did not understand the details, felt the shift. Expectation became something heavier, not just about who he would become, but about whether he would become it at all. And within that quiet, carefully structured life, he continued to grow, shaped not by absence alone, but by the constant, unspoken question that followed him. What if he could not become what he was meant to be? In families where magic is expected, its absence is rarely ignored. It becomes something noticed first in passing, then with growing attention, and finally with a quiet concern that settles into every observation. For Neville, these early years were marked not by sudden bursts of accidental magic, but by their absence. Other children, even at a young age, showed signs without trying, small things at first, objects shifting when emotions ran high, glass trembling at the edge of breaking, colors changing in ways that could not be explained. These moments were often met with laughter, with reassurance that magic would grow stronger in time. For Neville, those moments did not come. Augusta did not speak of it directly, but the difference was clear. She watched more closely, waiting for something that would confirm what she believed must be there. A sign, a flicker, anything that would place him firmly within the expectations of his family. Time passed without it. Conversations began to carry a different tone when Neville was not meant to hear them. Quiet exchanges between relatives, words spoken carefully, as though giving them too much weight might make them real. The possibility, unspoken but present, that he might not develop magic at all. In the wizarding world, this possibility had a name: squib, a word that carried with it a quiet separation, a distinction that placed one outside the natural flow of magical life. It was not a condemnation, but it was not something easily accepted within families where magic defined identity. Neville did not yet understand the word, but he felt its presence. It showed itself in small ways, in the way questions were asked more often, in the way he was encouraged to try, even when he did not know what he was trying to do, in the careful patience that surrounded him, a patience that felt different from the quiet certainty that others seemed to receive. He became aware, in a way children often do, that something about him required attention. Uncle Algie, who visited from time to time, did not approach the situation with the same restraint as Augusta. Where she was controlled, he was direct. He believed, firmly, that magic was there, waiting to be forced into the open, if necessary. His methods reflected that belief. There were small attempts at first, presented almost as games, encouragement to jump from slightly higher places, to take small risks that might provoke a reaction. Neville, uncertain but eager to meet expectations, followed along, hoping that something would happen. Nothing did. The attempts grew less gentle over time. It was not cruelty, not in the way it might be understood from the outside. It was a kind of certainty that refused to accept failure, a belief that if magic had not yet appeared, it simply needed the right moment, the right pressure to reveal itself. That moment came without warning. They were visiting one of Neville's relatives, the kind of gathering where conversation filled the room and attention shifted easily from one subject to another. Neville, small and quiet among adults, moved carefully through the space, aware of being watched, though not always directly. Uncle Algy, after a brief conversation that Neville did not fully follow, decided that the time had come to test what had not yet shown itself. There was no long explanation, no gradual lead into what was about to happen. Neville was simply taken, lifted, and carried toward an open window. The world outside stretched downward, unfamiliar and distant in a way that made the moment feel unreal. He did not understand. There was only the sudden shift from safety to uncertainty, the feeling of being held and then not. For a brief instant, there was nothing but air, no preparation, no expectation, only the pure, immediate experience of falling. It was in that moment, defined entirely by fear, that something within him responded. Magic, long silent, emerged not as a controlled action, but as a reaction, a reflex shaped by necessity rather than intention. Instead of striking the ground with the force that gravity demanded, Neville's fall slowed, then shifted, as though the air itself had changed its nature. He bounced, not with precision, not with elegance, but with enough force to break the descent, to turn what should have been injury into something almost absurd in its outcome. He landed, not unharmed, but not broken. The shock of the moment lingering far longer than any physical effect. Around him, reactions came quickly. Relief first, sharp and immediate, followed by laughter, the kind that releases tension rather than expresses humor. Voices overlapping, acknowledging what had just occurred, confirming what had been in doubt. Magic had appeared. For those watching, it was a moment of validation, proof that what had been expected was indeed present. The concern that had lingered quietly was pushed aside, replaced by the certainty that Neville was, as he should be, a wizard. For Neville, the moment settled differently. He did not experience it as triumph. There was no sense of achievement, no understanding that something significant had been proven. What remained was the memory of the fall, the sudden absence of control, the way fear had filled every part of him before anything else had a chance to respond. Magic, when it came, was tied to that fear. This connection did not disappear. In the days that followed, the story was retold, not as something troubling, but as something reassuring. The moment Neville's magic had finally revealed itself, a confirmation that all was as it should be. He listened, quietly, accepting the version of the event that was offered to him. But within him, something had shifted. Magic was no longer simply an expectation. It was something that had appeared only when fear demanded it, something uncertain, unpredictable, tied to a moment he could not fully understand. And as he continued to grow, that uncertainty would remain, shaping the way he saw himself and the way he approached the very thing he was meant to master. After that moment, nothing outwardly changed in the way others might have expected. The concern that Neville might not possess magic faded from conversation, replaced with quiet reassurance that everything had simply taken longer than usual. The proof had been seen. There was no longer any reason to question. But for Neville, the experience did not settle into certainty. Magic, which for others appeared naturally, even playfully, remained something distant to him. It did not come when he reached for it. It did not respond to curiosity or practice in the same way it seemed to for others. Instead, it lingered at the edge of his awareness, unpredictable, tied to moments of heightened emotion that he did not fully control. This created a subtle but persistent tension. He began to approach everything with caution, as though each action carried the possibility of revealing something about himself that he was not ready to see. Where other children might act without hesitation, he paused. Where others experimented, he held back, uncertain of what the outcome might be. Fear, though not always visible, became a quiet foundation beneath his thoughts. It was not a single, overwhelming fear, but a collection of smaller ones that gathered over time. The fear of doing something incorrectly, the fear of being watched too closely, the fear of confirming, in some way, that he was not what he was expected to be. These fears did not express themselves loudly. Neville did not resist openly, nor did he withdraw completely. Instead, he adapted. He moved carefully through his days, observing more than participating, learning not through confidence, but through avoidance of mistake. This kind of caution, though protective in some ways, shaped the way he experienced the world. Magic, when it did appear, was rarely something he initiated. It happened to him, rather than through him, a reaction instead of an action. And because of this, it carried with it a sense of uncertainty that he could not easily resolve. He did not trust it. This lack of trust extended beyond magic itself. It began to influence how he saw his own abilities, his own place within his family, within the wider world. Each small hesitation reinforced the idea that he needed to be careful, that confidence was something reserved for those who were certain of their capabilities. Neville was not certain. Augusta, observing this, responded in the only way she knew. She encouraged strength, urged him to be more decisive, more assured. In her view, hesitation was something to be overcome, not something to be accepted. She believed that confidence could be built through expectation, that by holding him to a standard, he would eventually rise to meet it. But expectation, without understanding, can deepen the very thing it seeks to correct. Neville listened. He tried. He made small efforts to act more quickly, to respond without overthinking. But each attempt carried the risk of failure, and each failure, however small, settled into him with quiet persistence. Over time, this created a pattern. He began to anticipate his own mistakes before they happened, to expect that things would go wrong, and to adjust his actions accordingly. This anticipation did not prevent errors. Instead, it made them feel inevitable, reinforcing the cycle that had already begun to form. The world, from his perspective, became something to move through carefully. He paid attention to details others might ignore, the tone of a voice, the shift in posture, the subtle changes that indicated whether he was meeting expectations or falling short. These observations helped him navigate situations, but they also kept him at a distance from them. Participation required a kind of certainty he did not possess. In quieter moments, when he was alone, this uncertainty settled more heavily. Without the structure of expectation guiding him, he found himself questioning things he could not yet fully articulate. Why magic did not come easily. Why confidence seemed to belong to others more naturally. Why he felt as though he were always slightly out of place, even in familiar surroundings. These questions did not lead to answers. They remained unresolved, shaping his thoughts in ways that were subtle but persistent. They did not overwhelm him, but they did not fade either. Instead, they became part of the background of his thinking, a constant presence that influenced how he saw himself. There were moments, brief and almost unnoticeable, where something else appeared beneath that uncertainty, a small instinct to act, to step forward without hesitation. These moments were rare and often passed quickly, but they existed. At the time, they did not seem significant. They were overshadowed by the larger pattern of caution and self-doubt that defined most of his experiences. But they were there, quietly forming, waiting for a time when they might become something more. For now, Neville continued as he had been, shaped by a childhood where magic had revealed itself through fear, where expectation pressed steadily against uncertainty, and where confidence remained something just beyond his reach. And within that quiet tension, his sense of self continued to take form, not through certainty, but through the careful navigation of a world that never felt entirely stable beneath his feet. The arrival of the letter did not come as a surprise, but it did not feel like certainty either. For years, it had been expected, spoken of as something inevitable. Hogwarts was not simply a school. It was a continuation of a path already chosen long before Neville had any say in it. When the envelope finally appeared, addressed in careful green ink, it carried with it the quiet confirmation that there was no longer any space left for doubt. Augusta received it first. She examined it with a composed expression, as though she had been waiting for this moment, not with excitement, but with patience. Only a small shift in posture, a subtle straightening, as if something long held in place had finally settled into alignment. Neville stood nearby, watching. He understood what the letter meant, at least in the simplest sense. It was an invitation, a beginning, the next step that all wizarding children were meant to take. But beneath that understanding was something less certain, a quiet hesitation, shaped by everything that had come before. He took the letter when it was offered, holding it carefully, as though it might reveal more than what was written inside. The parchment felt ordinary, but the meaning it carried was not. It represented expectation made real, a future that could no longer be imagined from a distance, but would soon be lived. Augusta instructed him to open it. He did so slowly, unfolding the pages, reading the words with careful attention. The list of required books, the mention of robes, the date of departure, all of it was clear, structured, leaving little room for interpretation. Hogwarts awaited. For Augusta, this was confirmation of what she had always believed. Neville was a wizard. His place at Hogwarts was secure. The concerns that had once lingered quietly could now be set aside. She spoke of preparations immediately, her voice steady, her plans already forming. There was much to be done. For Neville, the moment did not carry the same sense of resolution. Instead, it opened something new, a space filled with questions that had not yet been asked. Hogwarts was a place of learning, of magic, of expectation. It was where students proved themselves, where abilities were tested and refined. The thought of entering that world brought with it a quiet unease. He had seen glimpses of magic, had felt its presence in uncertain ways, but he had never been surrounded by it in a structured, demanding environment. At Hogwarts, there would be no space for hesitation, no room to step back and observe from a distance. He would be expected to participate, to perform, to become something more than he had been. This realization settled into him slowly. Augusta, focused on the practical aspects of preparation, did not dwell on these concerns. She arranged for the necessary supplies, guided him through the process with efficiency. There were robes to be fitted, books to be acquired, a wand to be chosen. Each step was handled with care, but without indulgence. Neville followed along, absorbing each detail, committing it to memory in the way he had learned to do. He did not question the process. He did not express his uncertainty. Instead, he moved through it quietly, allowing the structure around him to guide his actions. When the time came to visit Diagon Alley, the experience unfolded with a sense of quiet distance. The shops, filled with objects of magic and possibility, should have inspired excitement. For many, they did. But for Neville, the experience felt overwhelming in a way that was difficult to explain. There was too much to take in. Wands of different woods and cores, each with its own properties. Shelves lined with books filled with spells he could not yet understand. Robes that marked him as part of a world he still felt uncertain about entering. All of it existed in sharp contrast to the quiet, controlled environment he had known. Augusta moved through it with purpose. She spoke to shopkeepers with familiarity, made decisions quickly, ensured that everything Neville needed was obtained without delay. There was no room for hesitation. The path had been set, and it would be followed. When Neville was fitted for his robes, he stood still, allowing the measurements to be taken, the fabric adjusted. He watched the process carefully, noting each step, each movement. It was easier to focus on these details than to consider what they represented. He was preparing to leave. This realization came not as a sudden thought, but as a gradual understanding. It was somewhere he would live, separate from the structure that had defined his life until now. Separate from Augusta, from the familiar routines, from the quiet spaces where he had learned to exist. The idea of that separation carried its own uncertainty. There was no clear sense of excitement to replace it, no strong anticipation of what lay ahead, only a quiet awareness that something significant was approaching and that he was not entirely ready for it. As the days passed and the preparations neared completion, the reality of departure became more defined. Trunks were packed, books arranged carefully, supplies checked and rechecked. Augusta ensured that nothing was overlooked. On the surface, everything was in order, but beneath that structure, Neville's thoughts remained unsettled. He considered what Hogwarts might be like, what would be expected of him, how he would fit within a place where others might not carry the same uncertainty he did. He did not voice these thoughts. Instead, he carried them quietly, as he had learned to carry many things, allowing them to exist without demanding resolution. The morning of departure arrived without ceremony. There was no long conversation, no extended farewell. Augusta maintained her composure, offering instructions rather than reassurances. She spoke of what needed to be done, of how he should conduct himself, of the importance of remembering who he was. Neville listened. He understood the words, though their meaning felt heavier than he could fully grasp. He nodded when expected, responded when required, and allowed the moment to pass without interruption. As they made their way toward King's Cross, the world seemed to move as it always had. People passed by, unaware of the significance of what was about to occur. The station, busy and ordinary, stood in contrast to the quiet shift taking place within him. This was the beginning, not of certainty, not of confidence, but of something unknown. A step forward into a world that would demand more from him than he had yet been asked to give. And though he did not know it yet, the path ahead would not simply test what he could do, but what he could endure. The barrier between platforms was easy to miss if one did not know it was there. A simple divide in an ordinary station, unnoticed by those who passed by without looking closely. Augusta led him forward without hesitation, her pace steady, her expression unchanged, as though this crossing was no different from any other step she had taken. Neville followed. The moment of passing through felt brief, almost indistinct, but on the other side, the world shifted. The air seemed different, filled with movement that carried a quiet energy. The platform stretched out before him, lined with figures who belonged to a world he had only glimpsed from a distance. The train stood waiting, scarlet, long, and filled with motion. It seemed both inviting and overwhelming. Steam drifted upward in soft clouds, voices overlapping in a steady rhythm of conversation and farewell. Families gathered close, exchanging last words, last instructions, last reassurances before separation. Augusta did not linger. Her farewell was brief, precise, shaped by the same structure that had guided every other part of his life. She reminded him of what was expected, of the importance of carrying himself properly, of remembering where he came from. There were no extended gestures, no outward display of emotion, only a final nod, and then she stepped back. Neville stood still for a moment. Around him, others moved quickly, boarding the train, finding their places, calling out to one another with a familiarity that felt distant to him. The sense of being part of something larger was there, but it did not settle easily. He adjusted his grip on his trunk and moved forward. The compartments were already filling, doors opened and closed, laughter spilling into the corridor, conversations beginning and ending in quick succession. He passed several groups, each one already formed, already connected in ways that left little space for interruption. He did not stop. Instead, he continued down the corridor, searching for a place that did not feel occupied, not just physically, but socially, a space where he would not need to explain himself immediately, where he could observe before being observed. Eventually, he found it, an empty compartment, quiet, untouched by the energy that filled the rest of the train. He stepped inside, placed his trunk carefully, and sat down by the window. The glass reflected a faint image of his own face, one that he studied briefly before looking away. Outside, the platform remained busy. Parents leaned close to their children. Voices lowered, words meant only for those who needed to hear them. Others stood back, watching silently, allowing the moment to pass without interruption. It was a scene filled with connection, with familiarity, with a sense of shared understanding. Neville observed it from a distance. He tried, in a quiet way, to imagine himself within it, to picture a version of this moment where his own farewell had been different, where there had been more than instruction, more than expectation. The thought did not stay long. The train gave a soft, low sound, a signal that departure was near. Movement increased, final goodbyes exchanged, hands raised in farewell. Neville remained still, his focus shifting between the world outside and the space within his compartment. The door slid open. A boy entered first, red-haired, speaking quickly as he moved, followed by another who carried himself with a kind of cautious awareness. Their presence filled the space in a way that felt immediate, their conversation continuing without pause as they settled in. Neville did not speak at first. He listened. The rhythm of their words, the ease with which they spoke to one another, was something he recognized but did not share. They spoke of things he knew in fragments: Hogwarts, houses, expectations, but their tone carried a confidence that felt distant to him. More students passed by in the corridor, voices overlapping, creating a constant background of sound. Occasionally, someone would glance into the compartment, assessing the space, the people within it, before moving on. Neville remained aware of these glances. They were brief, often unintentional, but they carried a weight he could not ignore. Each one felt like a quiet question, one he did not yet know how to answer. As the train began to move, the platform slipping away gradually, the reality of departure settled more fully. There was no turning back now. The familiar world he had known, structured and controlled, was being left behind. Ahead lay something uncertain, something that would require him to engage in ways he had not yet learned. The conversation within the compartment continued. Neville contributed when he felt it was expected, offering small responses, careful words that did not draw too much attention. He did not want to say the wrong thing, did not want to reveal too much of the uncertainty that still lingered beneath the surface. At one point, he realized something was missing: his toad. The absence of the small creature, something simple and familiar, created a sudden sense of unease. He spoke up, his voice quieter than he intended, explaining that he had lost it. The others responded with mild concern, offering help in a way that was practical rather than emotional. The search began, moving through compartments, asking questions, retracing steps that were already unclear. Neville followed, his focus shifting from the broader uncertainty of the journey to this immediate, manageable problem. It was easier to search for something lost than to confront what lay ahead. The corridors, once distant, became immediate as he moved through them. Faces passed by, some familiar now, others still unknown. The act of searching gave him purpose, a temporary structure within the larger uncertainty. Eventually, the toad was found. The relief was quiet, but real. A small piece of stability returned, something he could hold on to as the journey continued. Back in the compartment, the rhythm of the train steady beneath them, the world outside blurred into motion. Fields passed by, distant and indistinct, marking the passage of time without demanding attention. Neville settled back into his seat. The conversation continued around him, the energy of others filling the space. He listened, observed, contributed when necessary. But beneath it all, the same quiet awareness remained. He was on his way to a place where he would be expected to become something more than he had yet been. And though the journey had begun, the path ahead remained uncertain, stretching forward in ways he could not yet fully see. The castle did not appear all at once. It revealed itself slowly, rising out of the darkness as the boats moved across the water. At first, there were only lights, distant and scattered, reflected in the surface below. Then the shape began to form, towers and walls stretching upward, solid and still against the night sky. Neville watched in silence. Around him, other students spoke in hushed tones, their voices filled with a kind of quiet wonder. Some leaned forward, trying to take in every detail, while others remained still, as though uncertain how to respond to what they were seeing. The scale of the place was difficult to measure, not just in size, but in presence. It felt older than anything he had known. The boats reached the shore, and the students were guided forward, their steps uneven as they moved from water to stone. The path led them upward, toward doors that stood open, waiting. The transition from outside to inside was brief, but it marked a shift that could not be undone. They entered together. The hall beyond was vast, filled with light that did not seem to come from any single source. Above them, the ceiling stretched into what looked like open sky. Stars scattered across it in quiet patterns. The air carried a warmth that contrasted with the cool night outside, but it did not feel entirely comforting. It felt watchful. Neville remained close to the group, moving when they moved, stopping when they stopped. He was aware of the other students, of their movements, their expressions, the way they seemed to carry themselves with a mixture of excitement and anticipation. He did not feel the same. The space was too large, the expectations too undefined. Everything around him suggested importance, significance, a moment that would shape what came next. But he did not know how to meet it. They were arranged in a line. At the front, a stool had been placed, simple in its design, but positioned in a way that made it impossible to ignore. Resting on it was an old hat, worn and patched, its appearance unremarkable in most ways. And yet, it carried a presence. Neville's attention fixed on it, not because he understood what it would do, but because of the way others seemed to regard it. There was a quiet shift in the room, a subtle change in focus as names began to be called. One by one, students stepped forward. Each name spoken aloud carried with it a moment of pause, a brief silence before movement resumed. The hat was placed on each head, and then, after a short time, a decision was announced. The responses varied. Some were met with immediate applause, voices rising in approval. Others received quieter acknowledgements, nods, murmurs that settled quickly back into stillness. Each student moved toward their place, joining those who had already been sorted, becoming part of something larger. Neville watched carefully. He tried to understand the pattern, to anticipate what might happen when his name was called, but there was no clear structure, no visible method that he could follow. The decisions seemed to come from somewhere beyond what he could see. This uncertainty settled into him. As the line grew shorter, the moment approached without warning. His name was spoken, clear and distinct, carrying across the hall in a way that made it impossible to ignore. He stepped forward. The movement felt heavier than it should have, as though each step required more effort than the last. He was aware of the eyes upon him, the quiet attention of those who had already taken their places. The space around him seemed to narrow, focusing entirely on this single point in time. He reached the stool and sat down. The hat was placed over his head, and for a moment there was nothing. The fabric settled, the world around him obscured, leaving only the sound of his own breathing, steady but uneven. Then, a voice. It did not come from outside, but from within, as though it existed in the space between thought and awareness. It spoke quietly, but with a clarity that left no room for doubt. It observed. Neville did not respond at first. He was not certain how to. The voice seemed to move through his thoughts, noting what it found, considering things he had not yet fully understood himself. There was hesitation. The voice spoke of qualities, of possibilities that did not feel fully formed. It noted uncertainty, caution, a tendency to hold back. It acknowledged fear, not as a flaw, but as something present, something that shaped his actions in ways both limiting and protective. Neville listened. He did not try to argue. He did not know what he would say if he did. Instead, he remained still, allowing the moment to unfold as it would. The voice considered. It spoke of where he might belong, of places where his nature might find a better fit. There were options, paths that could be taken, each one carrying its own implications. The decision was not immediate, time stretched. For those watching, the pause may have seemed brief. But for Neville, it felt longer, defined not by seconds, but by the weight of what was being decided. Then, a shift. The voice settled on something deeper, something that had not been immediately visible. It recognized a quality that existed beneath the fear, beneath the hesitation, not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it, a quiet kind of courage. The decision came, the word was spoken clearly, cutting through the stillness, carrying with it a finality that left no room for reconsideration. Gryffindor. The hat was lifted, the hall returned, the sound of voices rising once more, though not as loudly as it had for others. The response was present, but measured, as though uncertainty still lingered in the space around him. Neville stood. He moved toward the table indicated, his steps steady, though his thoughts remained unsettled. The decision had been made, but its meaning had not yet fully formed. He took his place. Around him, conversations resumed, attention shifting away, the moment already passing into memory. But for Neville, it remained. The voice, the hesitation, the recognition of something within him that he had not yet seen clearly. It did not bring confidence. It did not remove the uncertainty that had followed him this far, but it left something behind. A question, quiet and unresolved. What if there was more to him than he believed? The days that followed did not arrive with clarity. They came one after another, structured and predictable in form, yet uncertain in experience. Classes began early, each one introducing something new, something that required attention, memory, and control. For Neville, control remained the most difficult part. The classrooms of Hogwarts were not quiet places. They carried movement, expectation, and a rhythm that demanded participation. Students raised their wands, spoke incantations, followed instructions that, for many, seemed to unfold naturally. Neville watched closely. He listened to every word, repeated each instruction carefully in his mind before attempting it. He paid attention to the movements of others, the angles of their wands, the timing of their gestures. He tried to match what he saw, to recreate it with precision, but the results did not come easily. Spells that worked on the first attempt for others often failed in his hands. Objects that were meant to shift remained still. Each attempt ended not with progress, but with a quiet reminder of the gap between expectation and ability. The gap grew clearer with each passing lesson. Professors responded in different ways. Some offered guidance, their instructions repeated with patience, their tone measured. Others moved on more quickly, their attention drawn towards students who required less correction. None were openly harsh, but the difference in response did not go unnoticed. Neville felt it. It showed in the way he was called upon less frequently, in the way demonstrations passed him by, in the subtle adjustments made to accommodate his slower progress. These changes were not meant to isolate him, but they had that effect nonetheless. He became more careful. Each mistake, though often small, carried weight, not because of the immediate consequence, but because of what it seemed to confirm, that he was not keeping pace, that he was falling behind in ways that were becoming harder to ignore. Memory became another challenge. Lessons required not only understanding, but recall. Spells had to be remembered precisely. Sequences followed without hesitation. Neville approached this with the same care he applied to everything else, repeating information to himself, trying to fix it firmly in place. But under pressure, memory did not always hold. Words slipped away at the moment they were needed. Instructions blurred together, leaving him uncertain of the next step. The effort to remember became a task in itself, separate from the act of performing magic. This separation slowed him further. There were moments when frustration appeared, brief and contained, never allowed to fully express itself. He would pause, take a breath, begin again. Each repetition carried the hope of improvement, though the results remained inconsistent. Around him, others progressed. He observed it quietly, the ease with which spells were cast, the confidence that grew with each success, the way mistakes, when they happened, were met with correction rather than doubt. It was not resentment he felt, but distance. He did not see himself reflected in their experience. Their path seemed direct, moving forward with a clarity that he could not replicate. His own path felt uncertain, marked by hesitation, shaped by the constant need to reconsider each step. This difference settled into him. He began to anticipate difficulty before it arrived, to expect that each new lesson would present challenges he might not overcome immediately. This expectation did not stop him from trying, but it altered the way he approached each attempt. Caution replaced instinct. In Transfiguration, the precision required left little room for error. Small variations in movement or intent could alter the outcome completely. Neville approached each exercise with careful attention, but the results often fell short of what was required. In Charms, where intention played a significant role, the uncertainty he carried made it difficult to focus. The need to believe in the effect of the spell was essential, yet belief, for him, remained fragile. In Potions, the structure provided some stability. Measurements could be followed, steps could be repeated. But even here, small mistakes accumulated, altering results in ways that were not always immediately clear. Each subject revealed the same pattern. Effort was present, attention was consistent, but progress was uneven, marked by moments of success that did not always carry forward into the next attempt. Neville became aware of how he was seen, not through direct comments, but through observation. The way others reacted when he spoke, the subtle shifts in posture when he made a mistake, the quiet understanding that settled around him, defining him not by who he was, but by what he struggled to do. This awareness did not lead to withdrawal. Instead, it reinforced his caution. He spoke when necessary, acted when required, but rarely extended beyond what was expected. He remained present, engaged in his own way, though always slightly apart from the rhythm that guided the others. There were small moments of success, a spell that worked as intended, a task completed without error. These moments were brief, often unnoticed by others, but they held significance for him. They provided a sense of possibility, a suggestion that improvement, though slow, was not impossible. He held on to these moments quietly. They did not erase the larger pattern, but they offered something within it, a point of reference, a reminder that progress, however limited, existed. The days continued, lessons repeated, building upon themselves, each one adding to the foundation that all students were expected to develop. For Neville, that foundation formed differently, not through rapid advancement, but through persistence, through the steady accumulation of effort that did not always show immediate results. He did not stand out, not in the way others did. His presence was consistent, but unremarkable in the broader sense. He moved through his classes without drawing attention, his progress noted more by its absence than its presence. And yet, within that quiet space, something continued to form. Not confidence, not yet, but a kind of endurance, the ability to continue despite uncertainty, to remain present even when the path forward was unclear. It was not something easily seen, but it was there, developing slowly, shaped by each attempt, each failure, each small moment where he chose to continue rather than step back. And though it did not change how others saw him, it began, in the smallest way, to change how he moved through the world around him. There are some fears that form slowly, built from repeated moments that never quite settle. They do not arrive all at once, nor do they announce themselves clearly. Instead, they grow through experience, through anticipation, through the quiet understanding that certain situations will always carry a weight that cannot be easily set aside. For Neville, this weight began to take shape within the classroom. It was not the lessons themselves that created it, but the environment in which they were learned, the expectations, the attention, the awareness that each action could be observed and measured. In some classes, this pressure remained manageable, softened by patience or structure. In others, it sharpened. Potions was one of those places. The room itself carried a stillness that felt different from the others. The air was cooler, the light more controlled, the atmosphere shaped by precision and order. Ingredients were measured carefully, instructions followed without deviation. There was little room for uncertainty, and even less for hesitation. Professor Snape presided over this space with a presence that did not require raised voices or sudden movements. His attention was direct, his expectations clear, his responses measured in a way that left little room for misinterpretation. Neville felt that presence immediately. From the first lesson, the awareness of being observed settled into him with a clarity that was difficult to ignore. Each step in the process carried not only the risk of error, but the certainty that any error would be noticed. This awareness changed how he approached the task. He moved more carefully than before, his attention divided between the instructions in front of him and the sense of being watched. Each measurement was checked, each action considered before it was taken, but the more he tried to avoid mistakes, the more likely they became. Hands that should have been steady grew uncertain. Ingredients were added too quickly, or not quickly enough. Steps that had been understood moments before became unclear under pressure. The result was not a single failure, but a pattern of small missteps that accumulated over time. Professor Snape's responses were consistent. He did not shout. He did not display overt frustration. Instead, he observed, corrected, and moved on. But the way he observed, the way his attention lingered, created a kind of pressure that was difficult to escape. For Neville, this pressure became something more than situational. It began to shape expectation. Before each lesson, the anticipation of difficulty settled in, the understanding that this was a place where mistakes were more visible, where success required a level of control he did not yet possess. This anticipation did not prepare him, it made him more aware of what could go wrong, and in that awareness, fear began to form. Not fear of punishment, but fear of confirming something he already suspected, that under scrutiny, his uncertainty would become clear, that the gap between himself and others would be revealed, not just to him, but to everyone around him. This fear extended beyond potions. It followed him into other lessons, though less intensely. It appeared in moments where he was called upon unexpectedly, where attention shifted toward him without warning. A hesitation, a response that came too slowly, or not at all. Over time, this created a cycle. Fear led to hesitation. Hesitation led to error. Error reinforced fear. Breaking this cycle required a kind of confidence that Neville did not yet have. There was a lesson, later, in Defense Against the Dark Arts, where this pattern became visible in a different way. The class was introduced to a creature that did not attack physically, but reflected something internal, a boggart. It took the form of whatever the person facing it feared most. One by one, students stepped forward, each encountering a different shape, a different reflection of their own fears. Some responses were met with laughter, others with quiet acknowledgement. The exercise was meant to demonstrate control, to show that fear could be shaped, altered, made manageable. When Neville's turn came, the moment unfolded with a clarity that left little room for interpretation. The boggart shifted, its form settling into something familiar. Professor Snape. The reaction was immediate, though not loud. There was a brief pause, a recognition that moved through the room, subtle but present. The choice of form was not questioned. It did not need to be explained. Neville stood still. The fear was not new. It had been building, shaped by repeated experience. reinforced by each lesson where uncertainty met observation. Now it had taken form, externalized in a way that could not be ignored. He followed the instructions given. He focused, attempted to reshape the image, to alter its meaning. The process required intention, required a shift in perspective that was difficult to achieve in the moment. But he tried, as he always did, applying what he had been taught, even when the result was uncertain. The transformation was not perfect, but it was enough. The class moved on, the exercise continuing, attention shifting to others, but the moment remained, not because of its outcome, but because of what it revealed. Fear, once internal, had been made visible. For Neville, this visibility did not bring relief. It did not lessen the weight he carried. Instead, it clarified it, giving it a shape that could be recognized, but not easily dismissed. He returned to his place, his thoughts unsettled. The lesson had shown that fear could be confronted, that it could be altered, at least temporarily, but it had also confirmed its presence, its persistence, its influence over the way he moved through the world. This understanding settled into him quietly. Fear was not something that would disappear simply because it was named. It was something that would remain, shaping his actions, influencing his responses, requiring effort not to avoid, but to face. And though he did not yet know how to fully do that, the process had begun, not through confidence, not through certainty, but through the quiet recognition that fear, once seen clearly, could no longer be ignored. There are comparisons that are spoken openly, and others that exist without words. For Neville, both were present, though the unspoken ones carried more weight. They did not need to be explained. They existed in the way others looked at him, in the expectations that followed his name, in the quiet understanding that he was not being measured only against his peers. He was being measured against his parents. Frank and Alice Longbottom were not simply remembered, they were referenced. Their names carried a kind of recognition that extended beyond family, beyond personal memory. They had been skilled, respected, capable in ways that were clear and undeniable. Their legacy was not abstract, it was defined, known, and often repeated. Neville listened to these descriptions carefully. He absorbed the details, the quiet admiration in the voices that spoke of them, the way their actions were recalled with certainty, their abilities described without hesitation. These stories did not feel like distant history. They felt immediate, as though the expectation they created still existed in the present. And in that present, Neville stood. The contrast was not always direct. No one stood beside him and listed his shortcomings against their strengths. But the comparison was there, carried in tone, in assumption, in the way others seemed to expect something from him that had not yet appeared. He noticed it in small ways. When his name was spoken, there was often a pause, brief but distinct, a moment where recognition preceded understanding. The Longbottom name arrived first, bringing with it a set of associations that did not align easily with the person standing before them. Neville felt that pause. It did not need to be explained. He understood, in a quiet, instinctive way, that he was not meeting the expectation that came with it, that whatever others anticipated when they heard his name, it was not what they saw when they looked at him. This awareness did not lead to resistance. Instead, it deepened the uncertainty that had already begun to shape him. It added another layer to the caution he carried, another reason to hesitate, to measure his actions before taking them. Each mistake, each moment of failure, seemed to confirm not just his own doubts, but the possibility that others saw them as well. He became more observant. He paid attention to how others moved through their lessons, how they responded to challenges, how they recovered from mistakes. There was a difference, subtle but clear. They did not seem to carry the same weight of expectation. Their actions were not constantly measured against something beyond the immediate task. They were allowed to be themselves. Neville did not feel that same freedom. Even among his peers, the sense of comparison remained. It was not always external. Often, it existed entirely within his own thoughts. He saw the ease with which others succeeded, the confidence that grew naturally with each accomplishment. He noted the way they spoke, the certainty in their voices, the absence of hesitation. He did not see those qualities in himself. Instead, he saw the gap, the distance between where he was and where he believed he should be, the difference between what he could do and what he was expected to do. This gap did not remain constant. It shifted, sometimes narrowing, sometimes widening, but always present. Over time, it became part of how he understood himself. He did not reject the comparison. He accepted it, even when it worked against him. The idea that he should be more, that he should reach a standard already established, settled into him as something fixed. This acceptance shaped his actions. He tried, not only to improve, but to close the distance. Each effort carried the intention of becoming something closer to what was expected. But intention alone was not enough to bridge the gap. Progress came slowly, unevenly, often unnoticed by others, and so the comparison remained. There were moments, brief and quiet, where something else appeared beneath it. A small sense of frustration, not directed outward, but inward. A recognition that the standard he was trying to reach had been formed without his input, shaped by circumstances he did not choose. But these moments did not last. They were quickly replaced by the more familiar pattern: observation, adjustment, continued effort. Friendships, when they formed, offered some distance from this constant comparison. Among those who knew him more closely, the weight of his name seemed less immediate. They saw him as he was, rather than as he was expected to be. But even within these connections, the awareness did not disappear entirely. It remained quieter, less pronounced, but still present. A background presence that influenced how he spoke, how he acted, how he responded to the world around him. The comparison was not something that could be easily set aside. It had been there from the beginning, forming part of the structure within which he understood himself. It shaped not only how others saw him, but how he saw himself. And as he continued through his time at Hogwarts, that structure remained, steady and unyielding, guiding his thoughts in ways he did not yet know how to change. He was not only Neville Longbottom, he was the son of Frank and Alice. And the distance between those two identities was something he carried with him, quietly, in every step forward. There are objects in the wizarding world that appear simple at first glance, their purpose explained in a few words, their use easily understood. A Remembrall was one of these. A small, clear sphere that would turn red when the person holding it had forgotten something. It did not tell them what had been lost, only that something was missing. For Neville, the object carried a meaning that extended beyond its intended purpose. It was given to him by his grandmother, not as a curiosity, but as a solution. A way to manage the small gaps in memory that had begun to shape his daily experiences. Augusta did not speak of it as a concern. She presented it as something practical, something useful, something that would assist him in meeting expectations. Neville accepted it without question. He carried it with him, careful not to lose it, aware of its presence in a way that became constant. The smooth surface, the way it caught the light, the faint warmth it held when enclosed in his hand. It was simple, but it demanded attention. The first time it turned red, the moment passed quickly. He held it, noticed the shift in color, and paused. The meaning was clear. He had forgotten something, but what that something was did not come to him. He searched his thoughts, moving through them carefully, trying to locate the missing piece. It was not there. Around him, others noticed. Their reactions were mild, curious rather than concerned. A glance, a brief comment, a suggestion to think more carefully. But the object itself did not provide the answer. It only confirmed the absence. Neville felt that absence more strongly than the object's warning. It was not the forgetting itself that unsettled him. It was the inability to recover what had been lost. the sense that something had slipped away without leaving a clear path back to it. This uncertainty settled into him, familiar in its nature, though different in its form. He began to rely on the Remembrall more. He checked it often, holding it in quiet moments, watching for any change. The red glow, when it appeared, became something he anticipated rather than something that surprised him. It was a signal, a confirmation of something he already suspected, that he might have missed something important. The pattern repeated. The sphere would turn red. He would pause. He would search his thoughts. And more often than not, he would find nothing that answered the question. The object fulfilled its purpose, but it did not resolve the problem it revealed. Others found the situation mildly amusing, not in a way that was unkind, but in a way that created distance. It became a small part of how Neville was seen, the student who forgot things, the one who needed reminders, the one who carried a tool to manage something that others did not seem to struggle with in the same way. Neville did not respond to this openly. He accepted it, as he accepted many things, without protest, without explanation. But internally, the experience added another layer to the understanding he was forming about himself, that there were parts of him that did not function as expected. There was a moment, one that stood apart from the others, where the Remembrall's meaning became clearer, though not immediately. It occurred during a lesson, when attention was divided, when the focus of the room shifted quickly from one task to another. Neville held the sphere, felt the warmth in his hand, and noticed the change in color, red. He paused, as he always did, searching for what had been forgotten. His thoughts moved carefully, retracing steps, reviewing actions, attempting to identify the missing detail. It did not come. The frustration that followed was quiet, contained, but present. It was not directed outward. It did not disrupt the flow of the lesson, but it settled into him, reinforcing the pattern that had already begun to take shape. The Remembrall was not simply a tool. It became a reflection, not of what he had forgotten, but of how he understood himself. Each time it turned red, it confirmed something he had begun to believe, that he was not fully in control of his own actions, that parts of his experience were slipping beyond his grasp, unnoticed until it was too late. This belief did not lead to resignation. Instead, it deepened his caution. He tried to be more attentive, more aware of each step, each detail. He repeated instructions to himself, reviewed actions more carefully, attempted to anticipate where something might be missed. But anticipation is not the same as certainty. The Remembrall continued to turn red, and each time it did, the same pattern followed. The search, the uncertainty, the absence of resolution. Over time, the object became less about its intended function and more about what it represented. A constant reminder that something was not quite aligned. For Neville, this alignment extended beyond memory. It touched the way he moved through his lessons, the way he approached tasks, the way he saw himself in relation to others. The feeling that something essential might be missing, not in a single moment, but in a broader sense. He did not speak of this. He carried the Remembrall as he carried many things, quietly, without drawing attention to its deeper meaning, allowing it to exist as part of the structure of his daily life. But beneath that structure, the question remained. Not what had been forgotten in a specific moment, but something larger, less defined. What if the thing he could not remember was not a single action, but a part of himself he had not yet found? In a place as large and shifting as Hogwarts, it is possible to feel surrounded and still remain alone. Voices fill the corridors, footsteps echo across stone, conversations begin and end without effort. For many, this movement creates connection. For Neville, it often created distance, and yet, within that distance, something began to form. It did not arrive suddenly. It did not announce itself in a way that could be clearly defined. Instead, it appeared in small moments, in shared spaces where presence did not demand explanation, in quiet companionship that existed without expectation. Harry, and Ron were among the first. Their presence did not remove Neville's uncertainty, but it altered the way it was experienced. They spoke easily, moved through situations with a kind of directness that contrasted with his own caution. At first, Neville observed them as he observed most things, from a slight distance, unsure of how to place himself within their rhythm, but they did not require him to. There was no expectation that he speak more than he was comfortable with, no demand that he match their pace or their confidence. He was included simply by being there, by sharing the same space, by existing within the same moments. This form of acceptance was unfamiliar. It did not come with instruction or evaluation. It was not tied to performance or expectation. It existed quietly, without drawing attention to itself, and because of that, it allowed Neville to remain present in a way that felt less uncertain. Hermione's presence added something different. Where Harry and Ron moved through the world with instinct, Hermione approached it with structure. She valued precision, knowledge, understanding. In her, Neville recognized something closer to his own careful observation, though expressed with far more certainty. Her expectations were clear, her responses direct, but not unkind. In moments where he struggled, she offered correction rather than dismissal, guidance rather than silence. This did not remove his uncertainty, but it gave him a point of reference, something steady within the shifting demands of their lessons. These connections did not transform Neville's experience entirely. He remained cautious. He remained aware of his own hesitation, his own distance from the ease others seemed to possess. But within these friendships, the weight of that awareness became less immediate. He was not defined solely by his difficulties. There were times, particularly in shared moments outside of structured lessons, where the comparison that followed him seemed to fade. Conversations that did not revolve around performance, laughter that did not depend on success or failure. These moments were brief, but they carried a different kind of significance. They allowed him to exist without measurement. As time passed, these connections deepened, not through dramatic events, but through consistency, through repeated interactions that built familiarity, through shared experiences that created a sense of continuity. Neville began to contribute more, though still carefully. His words remained measured, his responses considered. But there was a shift, subtle and gradual, in the way he engaged. He listened less from a distance and more from within the conversation itself. He allowed himself, at times, to speak without fully preparing what he would say. These moments were small, but they marked a change. The presence of others did not remove his internal uncertainty, but it provided something alongside it, a counterbalance, a reminder that connection did not require perfection, that presence could exist even when confidence did not. There were others, too, who appeared later, expanding this quiet network of support. Luna, in particular, brought with her a perspective that did not align with expectation at all. She moved through the world without the same concern for how she was perceived, her thoughts shaped by a logic that did not always match those around her. In her, Neville saw something unexpected, a kind of acceptance that did not rely on fitting into a defined structure. She did not measure herself against others, nor did she seem to expect others to do the same. Her presence created a space where difference was not something to be corrected, but something to be acknowledged. This did not immediately change how Neville saw himself, but it introduced a possibility that the distance he felt, the difference he carried, did not have to exist only as a limitation, that it could be part of who he was, rather than something separate from it. Still, the feeling of being the weakest remained. It did not disappear simply because others accepted him. It continued to shape how he approached challenges, how he responded to failure, how he viewed his place within the group. He was aware, often acutely, that his contributions were not the same, that his abilities did not match those of his friend. But within that awareness, something else began to form, a recognition that being part of something did not require being the strongest within it. He remained cautious, he remained uncertain, but but he also remained present. And in that presence, supported quietly by those around him, the foundation of something more began to take shape. Not confidence, not yet, but a sense of belonging that did not depend entirely on his ability to meet expectation. It was not something that could be easily seen, but it was there, steady and growing, in the spaces between words, in the moments where he did not step back, but chose, quietly, to remain. There are moments that pass quietly at first, unnoticed by most, their meaning only becoming clear much later. They do not arrive with certainty or confidence. They are shaped instead by hesitation, by doubt, by the sense that something must be done, even when the outcome is unclear. For Neville, such a moment came not in the midst of a lesson, nor during a time when he felt prepared, but in a space where uncertainty was already present. The corridors were dim, the castle quieter than usual, as though holding its breath around events that were not meant to be seen. Neville had not intended to be part of it. He had not sought out the situation, nor placed himself within it by choice. And yet, he was there. He had seen Harry, Ron, and Hermione moving with purpose. Their actions guided by something urgent, something that did not allow for delay. Their focus was clear, their direction certain in a way that stood in contrast to his own usual caution. Neville did not understand the full scope of what they were doing, but he understood enough. Rules were being broken, boundaries crossed, the kind of actions that carried consequences, not just for those involved, but for others as well. This understanding settled into him, familiar in its structure. It aligned with the expectations he had been given, the lessons shaped by his grandmother's steady voice. There were things that should not be done. There were lines that should not be crossed. And when those lines were crossed, it was not enough to simply observe. He stepped forward. The decision did not come easily. It was not driven by confidence, nor by certainty that he would succeed. It came from a quieter place, one shaped by the belief that he could not remain still. His voice, when he spoke, carried that hesitation. He did not raise it. He did not command attention, but he spoke clearly enough, placing himself between his friends and the path they intended to follow. His words were simple, direct, shaped by what he believed to be right. They should not continue. The response was immediate. Confusion first, then resistance. Harry, Ron, and Hermione did not see the situation in the same way. Their actions were guided by a different understanding, one that Neville could not fully grasp in that moment. To them, this was necessary. To Neville, it was not. The difference between those perspectives created a tension that did not resolve easily. He remained where he was, his position unchanged, though the uncertainty within him grew stronger. He was aware of the imbalance, of the fact that he stood alone against three others who moved with far more confidence, but he did not step back. This was not defiance in the usual sense. There was no anger, no attempt to assert control, only a quiet insistence that something was wrong, that it should not be allowed to continue. His body responded to the strain of the moment. His posture tightened, his movements smaller, as though he were bracing against something unseen. Fear was present, as it often was, but it did not stop him. It remained alongside him, shaping the moment without defining it entirely. The outcome came quickly. Hermione, recognizing that the situation could not continue as it was, acted with a kind of decisiveness that Neville could not match. A spell was spoken, precise and controlled, and the effect was immediate. Neville's body stiffened. The ability to move was taken from him, not through force, but through magic that held him in place. His thoughts remained, clear and aware, but his physical presence was fixed, unable to respond. The moment passed. Harry, Ron, and Hermione moved on, their purpose unchanged, their path continuing without him. The corridor returned to stillness, the tension dissipating as quickly as it had formed. Neville remained where he was. Time moved differently in that stillness. There was no immediate reaction, no sudden shift in understanding, only the quiet awareness of what had happened, of the choice he had made, and of the result that had followed. He had not succeeded. He had not stopped them, had not altered the course of their actions. His attempt had ended in stillness, in the removal of his ability to act further. And yet, something remained. Not the failure, not the outcome, but the act itself, the decision to step forward, to speak, to place himself in opposition to those he considered friends, not out of certainty, but out of belief. This realization did not arrive immediately. It settled slowly, forming beneath the surface of his thoughts. The understanding that courage did not always lead to success, that it did not require confidence, nor guarantee a positive result. It required action. The following day, the moment was addressed, not in private, but in a way that extended beyond the immediate circle of those involved. Neville stood among the others, his position unchanged, his presence quiet as always. The acknowledgement came from an unexpected place. Dumbledore spoke of actions, of choices made not only in the face of external challenge, but within the boundaries of friendship. He recognized the difficulty of standing against others, of holding to a belief even when it set one apart. Neville listened. The words did not transform his understanding instantly. They did not remove the uncertainty he carried, but they offered something that had not been present before. Recognition, not of success, but of effort. Not of outcome, but of intention. For Neville, this recognition carried weight. It did not erase the memory of the moment, nor did it alter the fact that he had been unable to change what followed, but it reframed the experience, placing value not in what had been achieved, but in what had been attempted. He remained quiet. He did not speak of the moment, did not draw attention to it, did not seek further acknowledgement. But internally, something shifted. The idea that courage could exist without certainty, that it could be present even in failure. This understanding did not replace the caution that defined him, nor did it remove the fear that often accompanied his actions. But it added something alongside them, a small, steady point of reference. A reminder that even when the outcome was uncertain, the act of stepping forward held its own meaning. And though it was not yet enough to change how he saw himself entirely, it marked the beginning of something that would continue to grow quietly beneath the surface of all that followed. Time at Hogwarts did not move in a single direction. It circled back on itself, repeating patterns with small changes, allowing growth to appear gradually, almost unnoticed. For Neville, the years that followed did not bring sudden transformation. They brought something quieter. He continued to attend his lessons, to follow the structure that had been set from the beginning. The same classrooms, the same expectations, the same need to perform in ways that did not always come naturally to him. On the surface, little seemed different, but beneath that surface, something was shifting. It showed first in small details. A spell that had once failed began to hold, if only briefly. A movement that had required careful thought became slightly more familiar. These changes were not dramatic. They did not draw attention. Most passed without comment, absorbed into the flow of the lesson as though they had always been there. Neville noticed them. He held on to these moments quietly, not as proof of success, but as signs that effort was not without effect. Each small improvement added something to the foundation he had been building, piece by piece, without certainty of where it would lead. The pace remained slow. Others continued to advance more quickly, their progress visible, their confidence growing in ways that were clear and immediate. Neville did not try to match their speed. He could not. Instead, he focused on what was in front of him, on the next step, the next attempt. This approach did not remove the sense of distance. He was still aware of how he compared to others, of how his abilities were perceived. But that awareness began to lose some of its weight. It remained present, but it no longer defined every action. There were moments where he acted without fully considering the outcome. They were brief, often followed by a return to caution, but they existed. a wand movement performed with less hesitation, a response given before it had been fully rehearsed in his mind. These moments did not always lead to success, but they marked a change in how he approached the act itself. Failure, when it came, felt different. It was still present, still noticeable, but it did not carry the same immediate confirmation of doubt. Instead, it became something to move through, rather than something that halted progress entirely. This shift was subtle. It did not announce itself. It did not change how others saw him in any obvious way, but it altered his internal experience, creating space where there had previously been only tension. He began to take part more fully in certain lessons. In defense against the dark arts, in particular, the structure allowed for a different kind of engagement. The focus was not solely on precision, but on response, on the ability to act within uncertain situations. This suited Neville in a way he had not expected. He still approached each task carefully, but there was something in the nature of the subject that aligned with the quiet resilience he had been developing, the need to continue even when uncertain, to respond even when fear was present. These were not new experiences for him, but here they held value. He found himself improving, not rapidly, not in a way that drew immediate recognition, but steadily. Each lesson added something, each practice reinforcing what had come before. The progress was not always visible to others, but it was real. Outside of lessons, his place within his group of friends continued to settle. He remained quieter than most, his contributions measured, but he was no longer only observing. He participated more often, offering thoughts when he felt they were needed, acting when the situation required it. The hesitation did not disappear. It remained part of who he was, shaping his actions in ways that could not be entirely set aside. But it was no longer the only force guiding him. Alongside it, something else had taken root, a willingness to continue. This willingness did not depend on confidence. It did not require certainty of success. It existed independently, allowing him to act even when doubt was present. There were still moments where the old patterns returned, situations where the pressure felt too strong, where hesitation overtook action, where the gap between himself and others seemed as wide as it had ever been. These moments did not vanish simply because progress had been made, but they no longer defined the entirety of his experience. Each time they appeared, they were followed by something else, a return to effort, a continuation rather than a retreat. This pattern, repeated over time, began to shape something more stable, endurance. Not as a single act, but as a consistent presence. The ability to remain engaged, to continue despite uncertainty, to accept that progress might not always be visible, but could still exist. This endurance became part of how he moved through the world. It did not change how others saw him immediately. He was still the student who struggled, who required more time, who did not stand out in the way others did. But beneath that perception, something had shifted. He was no longer only defined by what he could not do. He was defined, in part, by the fact that he continued to try. This distinction, though small, carried significance. It marked a movement away from the earlier understanding of himself, where failure had been seen as confirmation of limitation. Now, failure existed alongside effort, as part of a process rather than as an endpoint. The years passed in this way, not marked by dramatic change, but by the steady accumulation of experience, of small adjustments that, taken together, began to form something more substantial. Neville did not become confident, not in the way others did, not in a way that removed doubt or hesitation entirely, but he became something else, someone who could continue, even when certainty was absent. And in that quiet persistence, something essential was taking shape, something that would not be immediately visible, but would, in time, prove stronger than the uncertainty that had once defined him. There are moments when the world shifts in a way that cannot be ignored, when what was once uncertain becomes clear, and the distance between past and present begins to close. For Neville, that shift did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded through small changes, through fragments of information that slowly formed a pattern he could no longer overlook. The return of Voldemort was not announced in a way that allowed for immediate understanding. At first, it appeared as rumor, whispers carried between conversations, fragments of news that seemed uncertain, incomplete. Some dismissed it, others listened more closely. Neville listened. He had grown accustomed to uncertainty, to the idea that what was known might not be complete. And so, when the whispers began, he did not dismiss them. He held them quietly, allowing them to settle alongside everything else he had learned. As the truth became clearer, the atmosphere within Hogwarts began to change. It was not immediate, not something that could be pointed to in a single moment. Instead, it showed itself in subtle ways. The tone of lessons shifted. Conversations became more cautious. There was a sense that something beyond the walls of the castle had begun to move again. For many students, this brought a distant concern. For Neville, it felt closer. The war that had shaped his earliest years was no longer something that belonged only to the past. It was returning, not in the same form, but with the same underlying presence, the same uncertainty, the same sense that what had once been contained was now expanding again. And with that return came something else, a deeper connection to what had happened to his parents. Before, their story had existed as something separate from the present. It was something that had shaped his life, but it had not been part of the world he actively moved through. Now, that distance began to narrow. The people responsible for their suffering were no longer figures confined to memory. They were part of what was happening again. This realization did not come all at once. It formed gradually, through conversations, through lessons that began to address darker subjects more directly, through the growing awareness that the line between past and present was no longer as clear as it had once been. Neville began to understand more fully what had been taken from his family, not just in terms of loss, but in terms of intention. The deliberate nature of what had been done, the fact that it had not been an accident, not a moment of uncontrolled violence, but a sustained act designed to break something that could not be easily repaired. This understanding settled into him quietly. It did not create immediate anger. It did not push him toward action in a way that could be easily seen. Instead, it deepened something that had already been present. The quiet endurance he had developed began to shift. It remained steady, but it gained a new dimension. A sense that what he had been carrying was not only personal, but connected to something larger. That his experiences, shaped by absence and uncertainty, were part of a broader pattern that was repeating itself. He began to pay more attention to what was happening around him, not just within his lessons, but beyond them. The way professors spoke, the changes in behavior among students, the subtle signs that something was unfolding beyond what was openly discussed. There was a tension in the air, not loud, not immediate, but persistent. It moved through conversations, through silences, through the spaces where information was withheld as much as where it was shared. Neville did not seek to understand everything. He knew that much of what was happening existed beyond his reach, but he recognized enough to know that the world was shifting, that the structure he had come to rely on was no longer as stable as it had once been. This recognition brought with it a different kind of awareness. His parents' story was no longer distant. It was part of the present. The people who had caused their suffering were not gone. The forces that had shaped that moment were active again, influencing the world in ways that could not be ignored. For Neville, this did not create a sudden change in behavior. He did not become more outwardly confident. He did not move through the world with new certainty. But internally, something adjusted. The questions he had carried for so long began to take on a different form. Not just why things had happened, but what it meant now that they were happening again. This shift did not provide answers, but it changed the way he understood his place within the world. He was no longer only someone shaped by past events. He was someone living within a present that was beginning to mirror that past. The connection between those two realities was no longer abstract. It was immediate, And though he did not yet know what that would require of him, the awareness remained, steady and unavoidable. The world was changing again, and this time, he was not standing at the edge of it, observing from a distance. He was within it. Understanding does not always arrive in a single moment. It gathers slowly, shaped by fragments that settle into place over time. For Neville, the truth about his parents had always been present, but not fully formed. It existed in stories, in quiet visits, in the absence that defined much of his life. But as the world shifted, that truth began to take on a sharper edge. He had known that his parents had been hurt, that they had been taken, subjected to something that had left them changed in ways that could not be reversed. These were facts, repeated without detail, accepted without full comprehension. Now, those details began to emerge, not through direct explanation, but through the way others spoke, through the subjects that surfaced in lessons, through the gradual removal of the distance that had once separated him from the reality of what had happened. The names became clearer: Bellatrix, Lestrange. Others who had followed Voldemort not out of fear, but out of belief. Those who had not retreated when the war ended, but had acted again, seeking something that no longer existed. Neville listened. The name did not carry immediate meaning at first. It was simply a part of the story, another piece of information that connected to what he already knew. But as he heard it repeated, as he began to understand its place within the larger narrative, something shifted. The abstract became specific. The idea of those responsible was no longer distant. It had form, identity, intention. It was something inflicted deliberately by individuals who had chosen to act in that way. This realization settled into him quietly. He did not react outwardly. There was no sudden change in his expression, no visible sign that something had altered. But internally, the understanding deepened. He began to revisit the memories he had, limited though they were. The visits to St. Mungo's. The way his mother would press something into his hand. A small, repeated gesture that carried meaning he had not fully understood at the time. The absence of recognition in their eyes. The disconnect between their presence and the idea of who they had once been. These moments, once isolated, began to connect. They formed a clearer picture, one that did not change what had happened, but changed how he saw it. The distance between past and present narrowed further, bringing with it a sense of continuity that could not be easily set aside. This was not something that had ended. It was something that remained. The damage done to his parents was not a moment in history. It was an ongoing reality, one that existed each time he visited them, each time he saw the space where their awareness should have been. And now, he understood more fully why. The knowledge did not bring clarity in the way one might expect. It did not resolve the questions he had carried, nor did it provide a sense of closure. Instead, it introduced something else. Weight. Not sudden, not overwhelming, but steady. It settled into him, shaping the way he thought, the way he connected past events to the present. He began to see his own experiences differently. The uncertainty he had carried, the hesitation, the fear that had shaped his actions. These were not isolated traits. They existed within a larger context, one that had been defined long before he had the ability to understand it. He was not separate from what had happened. He was part of its continuation. This understanding did not lead to immediate action. It did not change the way he moved through his lessons, nor did it alter his interactions in ways that others would notice. But it remained, present in his thoughts, influencing the way he responded to the world around him. There were moments, brief and contained, where something like anger appeared, not directed outward, not expressed in a way that demanded attention, but present nonetheless. It did not take shape fully, did not settle into something that could be easily named. It remained uncertain, much like the other emotions he had learned to carry. But it was there, and alongside it, something else began to form. A recognition that what had been done could not be undone, that the past could not be changed, no matter how clearly it was understood. But the present, the moment he now existed within, was not entirely fixed. This recognition did not provide direction. It did not tell him what to do or how to act, but it created a space where possibility could exist, even if that possibility remained undefined. Neville continued to listen, to observe, to gather information in the same careful way he always had. But now, the information carried a different significance. It was no longer simply knowledge, it was connection. The story of his parents was no longer something told to him. It was something he was beginning to understand for himself, piece by piece, without needing it to be explained. And in that understanding, something within him shifted, not visibly, not in a way that could be easily measured, but in a way that would continue to grow, shaped by everything that followed. The truth had always been there. Now, he could see it, and once seen, it could not be set aside. Change does not always begin with certainty. Sometimes it starts with quiet agreement, with small decisions made without full understanding of where they will lead. For Neville, that beginning came not through confidence, but through presence. Dumbledore's army did not form as something official. It existed first as a gathering, a response to a need that had not been fully acknowledged. Students came together in a space removed from observation, seeking to learn what was no longer being taught openly. Neville was there. At first, his role did not feel different from before. He listened, observed, followed instructions with the same care he had always applied. The environment, however, was not the same as his usual lessons. There was no pressure from authority, no sense of being measured against a rigid standard. There was only the shared intention to improve. This difference mattered. The absence of formal structure allowed something within Neville to settle. The fear that had shaped his responses in other classes did not disappear, but it loosened. Mistakes were not met with silence or quiet judgment, but with correction, repetition, and the understanding that progress required time. He began to practice. The spells taught were not simple. They required focus, control, and a willingness to attempt what had previously felt beyond his reach. Neville approached them as he approached everything else, carefully, methodically, allowing himself to repeat each movement until it held. At first, the results were uncertain. Some spells failed entirely. Others worked only in fragments, incomplete and unstable. But unlike before, these outcomes did not bring the same immediate sense of limitation. They were part of the process, expected rather than feared. Neville continued. Each attempt built upon the last. Each small success, however brief, added something to his understanding. The pattern that had defined his earlier experiences began to shift. Failure still existed, but it no longer carried the same weight. Within this space, he found something new. Not confidence in the way others expressed it, but a steadiness. The ability to continue without retreating, to remain engaged, even when the outcome was uncertain. This steadiness allowed him to move forward, not quickly, but consistently. Others noticed, not in a way that drew attention, but in small acknowledgements. A nod when a spell held, a glance that recognized improvement. These moments did not define him, but they reinforced the change that was taking place. He was no longer only struggling, he was learning. As the meetings continued, the nature of what they were preparing for became clearer. The world outside Hogwarts was shifting, and what they practiced within these walls carried a relevance that extended beyond the classroom. Neville understood this, though not fully. He recognized that what he was learning had purpose, that it connected to something larger than individual success or failure. This recognition did not change how he approached each lesson, but it added a layer of meaning to his efforts. The practice became more focused. Spells that required defense, reaction, control, under pressure. These were not theoretical exercises. They were responses to situations that might arise beyond the safety of the room they occupied. Neville responded to this differently than he might have before. Where once the idea of such situations would have reinforced his hesitation, Now it aligned with something he had already begun to develop. The ability to continue, even when uncertain. The willingness to act, even when fear was present. This did not remove the fear. It remained part of his experience, shaping his awareness, but it no longer prevented action in the same way. Instead, it existed alongside it, a constant presence that did not define the outcome. The moment came when practice gave way to reality. The Department of Mysteries was not a place Neville had expected to enter. It was not part of any lesson, not a destination he had prepared for. And yet, when the time came, he did not step back. He followed. The journey itself was uncertain, the purpose only partially understood. But the decision to go had already been made, not through certainty, but through the same quiet persistence that had guided him before. Inside, the environment was different. The space did not follow the familiar patterns of Hogwarts. It was disorienting, filled with structures that did not align with expectation, with movement that did not follow clear logic. The sense of being in a place beyond ordinary understanding was immediate. Neville moved carefully. He remained close to the others, aware of his surroundings, aware of the need to respond quickly if required. The training he had received, incomplete though it was, provided a foundation he could rely on. When the confrontation began, it did not unfold in a way that allowed for preparation. The presence of the Death Eaters shifted the atmosphere instantly. The uncertainty that had filled the space was replaced by something more direct, more immediate. The need to act was no longer theoretical. Neville acted. Not with precision, not with the ease others might have shown, but with determination. The spells he cast were not perfect, but they were real. They carried intention, shaped by the practice that had preceded them. He remained present. Even as the situation escalated, even as the danger became clear, he did not retreat. The fear was there, as it always had been, but it did not stop him. It moved with him, part of the moment, but not in control of it. This was different, not because he had become something new, but because he had begun to use what had always been there. The endurance, the willingness to continue, the ability to act despite uncertainty. The battle did not resolve quickly. It moved in fragments, moments of action followed by brief pauses, each one carrying its own weight. Neville did not track it fully. He responded to what was in front of him, to the immediate need, to the presence of those around him. And through it, he remained, not as an observer, not as someone standing at the edge, but as part of the moment itself. The outcome, when it came, did not erase what had happened, but it confirmed something that had been forming quietly. Neville Longbottom was no longer only defined by hesitation. He had stepped forward, and in doing so, he had become something more than he had believed possible. There are moments when a person comes face to face with something that has existed in their life only as a story, as a name spoken by others, as a distant source of pain that has never taken form. When that distance disappears, when the abstract becomes real, the experience does not always arrive with clarity. It unfolds slowly, even in the middle of urgency. For Neville, that moment came without preparation. The Department of Mysteries had already shifted around him, its unfamiliar corridors creating a sense of disorientation that made each step uncertain. The presence of danger was clear, but not yet defined. It moved through the space in a way that did not allow for anticipation. Then, it became visible. The Death Eaters did not appear as shadows or distant threats. They stood within the same space, their presence immediate, their purpose unmistakable. Among them was a figure Neville recognized, not through direct memory, but through the quiet accumulation of understanding that had formed over time. Bellatrix Lestrange. The name settled into the moment with a weight that did not require explanation. It carried with it everything Neville had come to understand about his parents, about what had been done to them, about the absence that had shaped his life. For a brief instant, the world seemed to narrow. The movement around him, the voices, the shifting environment, all receded, leaving only the presence of that figure, standing not as a distant part of the past, but as something immediate, something real. He did not move at first. The recognition did not translate immediately into action. It settled into him, connecting fragments of understanding into something clearer, though not simpler. The person responsible for his parents' suffering was no longer an idea. She was there. Bellatrix did not approach him with hesitation. Her presence carried a certainty that did not require force to be understood. She spoke, her words shaped not by explanation, but by amusement, by a kind of recognition that acknowledged him in a way that felt both direct and distant. She knew who he was, not as Neville, not as an individual defined by his own actions, but as the son of Frank and Alice. The connection was immediate, placed upon him without consideration of who he had become. Neville listened. The words did not arrive as something to be processed logically. They carried an emotional weight that moved through him in a way that was difficult to separate from the moment itself. The past and present existed together, overlapping in a way that left little room for distance. She spoke of his parents, not with regret, not with acknowledgement of harm, but with a kind of detached satisfaction. The suffering that had defined Neville's life was, to her, simply an event, something that had occurred, something that held meaning only in the context of what she believed. This contrast settled into him. The quiet absence he had known, the visits to St. Mungo's, the small gestures that had never fully connected, all of it stood against the presence of someone who had caused it, who saw it not as loss, but as consequence. The difference was clear, and in that clarity, something shifted. The hesitation that had once defined his responses did not disappear, but it changed. It no longer held the same control. The fear was still there, present, as it had always been, but it did not prevent action in the same way. Neville stepped forward. The movement was not dramatic. It did not carry the certainty of someone who believed they would succeed. But it was deliberate, shaped by something that had been forming over time. He raised his wand. The act itself was simple, but its meaning extended beyond the moment. It was not only a response to immediate danger, it was a confrontation with something that had existed in his life without form, without presence. Now, it had both. The spell he cast was not perfect. It did not carry the precision that others might have achieved, but it was real, directed, shaped by intention rather than uncertainty. It marked a shift from observation to action, from distance to engagement. Bellatrix responded. Her reaction was not one of concern, but of amusement. The difference in experience, in power, in confidence was evident. She moved with ease, her actions controlled, her responses shaped by a familiarity with situations like this. Neville felt the impact of that difference. The gap between them was clear, not only in ability, but in understanding. She moved through the moment without hesitation, while he navigated it with the same careful awareness that had always defined him. But he did not retreat. Even as the situation intensified, even as the danger became more immediate, he remained present. The fear that existed within him did not disappear, but it no longer dictated his actions. He continued to act. Each movement, each spell, carried the same uncertainty, the same lack of precision, but they were not absent. They existed, contributing to the moment, shaping his presence within it. Bellatrix spoke again. Her words, directed at him, carried a familiarity that felt misplaced. She referred to his parents not as individuals, but as part of a narrative she had constructed, a story in which their suffering held a different meaning. Neville heard the words, but did not respond. There was nothing to say that would alter what had already been done, no argument that would change her understanding. The moment was not about explanation, it was about presence. The confrontation did not resolve cleanly. It moved as the rest of the battle moved, in fragments, in shifting positions, in moments that began and ended without clear boundaries. Neville did not track each detail. He responded as he could, holding his place within the larger movement, and through it, something remained constant. He did not step back. The person who had once defined his understanding of fear stood before him, and he remained. Not without fear, not without uncertainty, but without retreat. This did not erase what had been done. It did not restore what had been lost. But it marked a change that could not be undone. The distance between Neville and his past had closed, and in that space, he had chosen to stand. Pain, when it arrives in the middle of movement, does not always announce itself clearly. It blends into the moment, becoming part of the urgency, part of the shifting space where action continues, whether the body is ready or not. For Neville, the experience of pain during the battle did not stand apart from what was happening around him. It became woven into it. The Department of Mysteries offered no steady ground. The rooms shifted, the pathways altered, the sense of direction became unreliable. What had begun as a search had turned into something else entirely, something defined not by intention, but by response. Neville moved within that uncertainty, following what he could, reacting to what was immediate. The first impact was not fully understood. A force struck, sharp and disorienting, not strong enough to end his movement, but enough to alter it. His balance shifted, his breath caught briefly, the clarity of his surroundings interrupted for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. He did not stop. There was no time to consider what had happened, no space to examine the source of the pain. The moment required continuation, and so he continued. His body adjusted, compensating without instruction, moving forward with the same cautious determination that had guided him before. The environment did not allow for stillness. Voices echoed, spells crossed the space in sudden flashes of light, the structure of the room itself changing in ways that made each step uncertain. Neville remained within it, his awareness divided between the need to act and the effort to understand what was happening around him. Another impact came, this time more direct, more difficult to absorb without reaction. The pain was clearer now, no longer something that could be set aside entirely. It settled into him, immediate and persistent, altering the way he moved, the way he held himself. Still, he did not retreat. The instinct to step back, to seek distance from what was causing harm, was present. It existed alongside the fear that had always shaped his responses, but something else had taken hold as well, something that did not allow him to follow that instinct fully. He remained. The spells he cast were not precise. They carried the same uncertainty as before, shaped by a need to respond rather than a confidence in outcome. But they were present, contributing to the movement of the battle, marking his place within it. Around him, others moved with greater certainty. Their actions were faster, more controlled, their responses shaped by experience he did not yet have. Neville was aware of this difference, just as he had been in every other situation where comparison existed, but the awareness did not stop him. It remained in the background, acknowledged, but not given full control. The immediate need to act, to remain present, took precedence over the familiar pattern of hesitation. The pain did not lessen. It remained steady, a constant presence that shaped each movement. It slowed him in small ways, made each action require more effort than before, but it did not remove his ability to continue. He adjusted. His movements became more deliberate, more focused on maintaining balance, on responding to what was directly in front of him, rather than attempting to anticipate what might come next. This focus narrowed his awareness, creating a space where action could exist without being overwhelmed by the larger chaos around him. There was a moment, brief and easily missed, where the pain might have become too much. A pause, not in action, but in clarity. A point where the body signaled its limits, where the instinct to stop, to withdraw, became stronger than before. For a moment, it seemed possible that he might step back, that the weight of the experience would exceed what he could carry. But the moment passed, not through force, not through a sudden surge of strength, but through continuation. He moved again, not because the pain had disappeared, but because stopping did not feel like an option that aligned with what was happening around him. This was not a decision made consciously. It was something deeper, something that had been forming over time. The quiet endurance, the willingness to continue despite uncertainty, now extended beyond internal hesitation into physical experience. Pain became part of the process. Not something to be avoided, but something to move through. It did not define the moment, though it shaped it. It existed alongside action, influencing it without controlling it entirely. The battle continued. Its movements remained unpredictable, its structure unclear. Neville did not attempt to understand it fully. He responded to what he could see, to what required immediate attention, allowing the larger picture to remain out of focus. And through it, he remained present. The fear that had once held him back did not disappear, but it no longer had the same effect. It existed within the moment, but it did not dictate the outcome. It moved with him, part of the experience, but not the defining force. When the moment began to shift, when the intensity of the battle altered in ways that suggested an approaching end, Neville's awareness expanded slightly. The immediate pressure lessened, though the effects of what had occurred remained. He was still standing. The realization did not come with relief. It came as a quiet acknowledgement, a recognition that he had moved through something that had once seemed beyond his reach. Not without difficulty, not without pain, but without retreat. This did not erase what had happened. It did not remove the physical impact, nor did it resolve the larger conflict that had brought them there, but it marked something that could not be undone. Neville Longbottom had faced a moment defined by danger, by uncertainty, by pain, and he had continued, not because the fear had gone, but because he had learned, in the quiet way he learned everything, that it was possible to move forward even when it remained. When the term resumed, the castle felt the same and not the same. The corridors held their familiar echoes, the staircases turned as they always had, and the lessons continued with the same structure. Yet beneath that rhythm, something had shifted in a way that could not be easily named. Neville noticed it in small moments, in the way he entered a classroom without pausing quite as long at the threshold, in the way his hand found his wand with a steadier grip, in the space between instruction and action, where hesitation had once settled. There was now something quieter, something that allowed movement to begin without waiting for certainty. The change did not draw attention. Others moved through their days as before, their own concerns shaping their experience. If they noticed anything different in him, it was not spoken. The castle did not mark the shift, and Neville did not announce it. It remained internal. In lessons, the pattern that had defined him still existed. Spells did not always work on the first attempt. Instructions sometimes slipped from memory at the moment they were needed. There were still pauses, still small mistakes that revealed the limits of his control. But the response to those moments had altered. Where once a mistake would settle into him as confirmation of doubt, it now passed more quickly, not ignored, not dismissed, but accepted as part of what he was doing. He would pause, adjust, try again. The repetition remained, but the weight it carried had lessened. In defense against the dark arts, this shift became more visible. The lessons required reaction, not perfection, movement, not certainty. His spells were still uneven, but they came without the same delay. The space between intention and action had narrowed. He noticed this, not as a source of pride, but as a point of reference. Something that could be returned to. Something that existed independently of how others performed. It did not remove the awareness of difference, but it provided something alongside it. A sense of capability. Outside of lessons, his presence among his friends felt steadier. He spoke a little more often, though still with care. He offered thoughts without always preparing them fully in advance. The words were not always precise, but they were present. The act of speaking, of contributing, no longer carried the same immediate sense of risk. The others responded as they always had. There was no shift in how they treated him, no sudden change in their expectations. But within that consistency, Neville found something that had not been there before. Comfort. Not complete, not without interruption, but enough to allow him to remain engaged without constant self-observation. The need to measure each action, each word, began to ease, replaced by a quieter awareness that did not demand the same level of control. This did not extend to every part of his experience. There were still moments where the old patterns returned, situations where the pressure felt too strong, where hesitation reappeared with its familiar weight. These moments were not erased by what had changed, but they no longer held the same permanence. They passed, and in their passing, they revealed something that had not been visible before. He carried this understanding with him, not as a clear belief, but as a quiet possibility. The idea that what had defined him might not remain unchanged, that the distance he had always felt between himself and others could, in some way, be altered. This did not lead to sudden confidence. Neville did not begin to move through the world with certainty, nor did he lose the cautious nature that had shaped him from the beginning. But within that caution, something else had taken root, a steadiness that did not depend on immediate success. It showed in the way he approached each day, each lesson, each interaction, not with expectation of ease, but with acceptance of effort. The understanding that progress might remain slow, but that it could continue. The castle, in its vast and shifting presence, offered no acknowledgement of this change. It remained, as it had always been, a place of learning, of expectation, of quiet observation. But for Neville, it had become something slightly different. Not a place where he was only measured, but a place where he could exist within that measurement without being defined entirely by it. This distinction was small, but it mattered. It allowed him to move forward without the constant need to compare, to measure, to confirm his place within the structure around him. He still saw the differences, still recognized where others excelled, where he struggled. But those differences no longer carried the same weight. They existed, but they did not define the entirety of his experience. As the days continued, the shift remained subtle, almost invisible from the outside. But within him, it held steady, shaping the way he approached what lay ahead. He was still uncertain, still cautious, still aware of the distance between where he was and where he might be expected to go, but he was also something else. Someone who had faced something beyond the quiet challenges of the classroom and returned not unchanged, but altered in a way that allowed him to continue with a different understanding. And though that understanding was not yet complete, it was enough to carry him forward, step by careful step, into whatever would come next. The change did not come with a single announcement. It arrived through presence, through new figures in familiar corridors, through a tone that shifted just enough to be noticed, and then remained. Hogwarts, which had always carried expectation, now carried something else. Control. The castle continued to function as it always had. Lessons were held. Students moved between classes. The structure remained intact. But beneath that structure, the purpose had altered in ways that could not be ignored. The Carrows did not hide their role. They did not attempt to soften what they brought with them. Their authority was clear, not through explanation, but through action. The rules they enforced were not meant to guide learning, they were meant to shape behavior. Fear became part of the environment, not immediate, not overwhelming in every moment, but present. It existed in the way students spoke more quietly, in the way movements were more controlled, in the way attention shifted quickly when certain figures entered a room. Neville noticed it. He recognized the pattern, not because it was entirely new, but because it echoed something he had already come to understand. The quiet tension that had shaped parts of his childhood now extended into the place where he had once begun to find a sense of steadiness. The difference was that this tension was no longer subtle, it was direct. Lessons changed. Subjects that had once focused on defense, on understanding, now carried a different emphasis. Students were expected not only to learn, but to demonstrate obedience. The line between instruction and enforcement blurred, creating an environment where the purpose of learning was no longer clear. Neville moved through this change with the same careful awareness that had always guided him. He observed, he listened, he adapted, but something within him responded differently than it might have before. The presence of the Carrows, the methods they used, the way they shaped the environment through fear, did not exist as something separate from his past. It connected directly to it. He had seen the result of this kind of control. He had grown up with its consequences. The Cruciatus Curse, once something he had understood only through its effects on his parents, now existed as part of the structure of the school itself. Not hidden, not forbidden in practice, but used as a tool. This reality settled into him with a clarity that did not require explanation. The place where he had begun to learn, to develop, to find small moments of progress, had become something else. Not entirely, not in every space, but enough to alter how he moved within it. Students reacted in different ways. Some complied without question, adjusting to the new structure in order to avoid attention. Others resisted quietly, finding small ways to maintain a sense of control over their own actions. Neville did not respond immediately. He did not take a visible stand, nor did he withdraw entirely. Instead, he remained present, allowing the situation to unfold, observing the patterns that emerged, but the connection to his past remained. Each time the Carrows acted, each time fear was used as a method of control, it reinforced something he already knew. This was not simply authority, it was something more deliberate. And in that recognition, the quiet endurance he had developed began to take on a different shape. He did not yet act, but he did not accept the situation in the same way he might have before. The difference was internal. Where once he might have seen himself as separate from the forces shaping his environment, now he recognized his place within it, not as someone defined by it, but as someone who had already experienced its effects in a way that others had not. This recognition did not bring clarity of action, but it brought awareness, and that awareness remained, steady and present. As the castle continued to shift around him, becoming a place where learning and fear existed side by side, each shaping the other in ways that could not be easily undone. The change in the castle did not remain contained within rules or lessons. It moved deeper, shaping behavior in ways that were no longer indirect. What had once been implied became visible. What had once been avoided began to occur without concealment. The Carrows did not rely on suggestion. Their authority extended beyond instruction into action that carried immediate consequence. Students were not only expected to learn, but to demonstrate compliance in ways that left little room for refusal. Punishment was no longer something distant, reserved for clear violations. It became part of the structure itself. Neville saw this clearly. He did not need explanation. The pattern was familiar, though it now unfolded in a place that had once felt separate from such things. The use of fear, the insistence on obedience, the removal of choice. These were not new concepts. They were echoes of something he had known without fully understanding. Now, they stood in front of him. There were moments when students were called forward, not for recognition, not for achievement, but to participate in something that shifted the purpose of the room entirely. The expectation was clear. They were to act, not with intention of learning, but with intention of control. Neville watched. The first time he saw the Cruciatus Curse used in this way, the moment did not arrive as a surprise. It came as a confirmation of something he had already begun to understand. The curse that had shaped his parents' lives was not confined to the past. It existed here. The effect was immediate. Pain, though not visible in the way physical injury might be, made itself known through movement, through sound, through the way the body responded without control. It did not require explanation. Its purpose was clear in the way it altered the person it touched. Neville did not look away. The instinct to do so was present. The desire to distance himself from what he was seeing, to treat it as something separate, something that did not need to be fully observed, but he remained. The connection was too direct. He had grown up with the result of this curse. He had seen what it left behind, how it could alter a person in ways that could not be undone. To see it now, used as a method within the place where he was meant to learn, did not feel unreal. It felt consistent. Others reacted differently. Some avoided watching, turning their attention elsewhere, focusing on anything that might provide distance from what was happening. Others remained still, their expressions controlled, their responses contained. Fear moved through the room, not loudly, not in a way that disrupted the structure, but in a way that shaped behavior. It guided actions, influenced decisions, created a space where compliance felt necessary, not because it was right, but because it avoided immediate consequence. Neville understood this. He had lived within a version of this structure before, though not in the same form. The expectation to meet a standard, the awareness of being observed, the knowledge that failure carried weight, these were familiar. But this was different. This was not expectation. This was enforcement. The distinction settled into him with clarity. The Carrows did not seek improvement. They sought control. The lessons they imposed were not designed to teach, but to shape behavior through fear. The difference between learning and submission became increasingly difficult to separate. Neville did not respond immediately. He did not challenge them openly, nor did he accept what they were doing without question. Instead, he remained within the space, observing, allowing the pattern to become clear before deciding how to act. But the connection to his parents remained present. Each use of the curse, each moment where pain was imposed as a method of control, reinforced something he already knew. This was the force that had shaped his life, that had taken from him something he could not fully define, but had always felt. To see it repeated, to see it used without restraint, did not create confusion. It created recognition. The quiet endurance he had developed did not disappear in this moment. It shifted. Where once it had been directed inward, allowing him to continue despite uncertainty, it now extended outward, not as immediate action, but as a growing awareness that what he was witnessing could not remain unchallenged. He did not yet act, but the space between observation and response began to narrow. Each moment added to the understanding he was forming, each repetition of the pattern reinforcing the need for something to change. The idea did not arrive fully formed, it did not carry clear direction, but it remained, a steady presence within him, shaped by everything he had seen, everything he had experienced, everything that had led him to this point. The Carrows continued. The structure they imposed held, reinforced by fear, by the absence of open resistance, by the understanding that action carried risk. But beneath that structure, something else began to form, not visible, not immediate, but present. And for Neville, that presence marked the beginning of a shift that would not remain internal for long. Change, when it begins to move outward, does not always look like defiance. It often appears first as quiet coordination, as small decisions shared between a few, then carried carefully into spaces where they might continue without being seen. For Neville, this shift did not arrive with certainty. It formed gradually, shaped by what he had observed, by the recognition that what was happening within the castle could not remain unchallenged. The awareness that had settled into him now required something more than understanding. It required action. He did not announce this to others. He did not step forward in a way that demanded attention. Instead, he spoke quietly, choosing his words with the same care he had always used. He reached out to those who had shown, in small ways, that they did not accept the structure imposed upon them. The connections formed slowly, not through large gatherings, not through visible organization, but through moments of shared understanding, a glance that lasted slightly longer than necessary, a conversation held in a place where voices did not carry, a suggestion made without direct explanation, understood without needing to be clarified. These moments created something that did not yet have a name, a network, small and cautious, built on trust rather than certainty. Each person who became part of it did so quietly, aware of the risk, aware of what might follow if their actions were discovered. Neville remained at the center of this, not because he claimed the role, but because others began to look to him. They saw the steadiness he carried, the way he moved through the changing environment without withdrawing, without fully submitting. He did not see himself as a leader, but he did not step away from the responsibility when it appeared. The actions they took were small at first, refusals that were not spoken aloud, assistance offered to those who had been targeted, information shared carefully, allowing others to prepare for what might come without drawing attention to how they knew. Each act carried risk. Each one required a decision, a willingness to step beyond observation into participation. Neville approached these decisions as he approached everything else, not with certainty, but with a quiet understanding that they needed to be made. The environment within Hogwarts did not allow for open resistance. The presence of the Carrows ensured that their control was maintained through observation, through the knowledge that any visible challenge would be met with immediate consequence. This understanding shaped how Neville and the others acted. They remained unseen, or as close to unseen as possible. The room of requirement became part of this effort, a space that did not reveal itself to those who did not seek it in the right way. It provided something that the rest of the castle no longer offered: safety, not absolute, not guaranteed, but enough to allow for moments where the pressure could be set aside. Within that space, the structure changed. Students who had learned to move carefully, to avoid attention, now had a place where they could speak more freely, where they could practice without the immediate presence of authority shaping their actions. Neville was there. He did not transform within that space. He remained who he had been, cautious, deliberate, aware of his limitations. But the context allowed something else to emerge: the ability to guide others, not through command, but through example. He showed them what it meant to continue, to act, even when uncertain, to support one another, even when doing so carried risk. His approach did not rely on strength or precision, but on persistence, on the steady presence that had defined his growth. Others responded to this, not with admiration in the way one might expect, but with trust. They followed not because he demanded it, but because his actions aligned with something they recognized: a refusal to accept what had been imposed upon them, even if that refusal remained quiet. The resistance grew, not in size alone, but in purpose. What had begun as small acts of defiance became more structured, more deliberate. Plans formed, not with certainty of success, but with the understanding that inaction was no longer an option. Neville remained central to this, not because he sought control, but because he remained present when others might have stepped back. He carried the weight of what he had seen, what he had experienced, and allowed it to guide his actions without letting it overwhelm them. There were consequences. Not all actions went unnoticed. Not all efforts remained hidden. The Carrows responded when they became aware of disruption, their methods unchanged, their enforcement immediate. Neville faced this directly. He did not avoid the consequences when they came. He accepted them, not as something separate from his actions, but as part of them. The pain, the risk, the uncertainty, all became elements of the same path. And still, he continued. This continuation was not driven by certainty of outcome. He did not believe that what they were doing would immediately change the structure of the castle, nor did he expect that their efforts would go without cost. But he understood that the act of resistance itself held meaning, that it altered something, even if only in small ways. The castle remained under control. The Carrows continued to enforce their authority, the environment still shaped by fear, but beneath that structure, something else existed now, a quiet resistance. And at its center, Neville Longbottom, not as someone transformed into something entirely new, but as someone who had taken what he had always carried and allowed it to move outward, shaping the world around him in ways that could no longer be ignored. Days began to blend together, marked less by lessons and more by what had to be endured between them. The structure of Hogwarts remained, but its purpose had shifted so completely that time itself felt altered. Morning and evening were no longer defined by routine alone, but by the question of what would happen within them. Neville moved through this with a steadiness that had not been present before. It did not come from certainty. It did not remove the fear that still accompanied each step, but it allowed him to continue, even when the outcome of each day could not be predicted. Punishment became part of that pattern. It was not always immediate. Sometimes it followed actions that had gone unnoticed for a time. Sometimes it arrived without clear cause, imposed as a reminder rather than a response. The method remained consistent: control through pain, compliance through consequence. Neville did not avoid it. There were moments when his actions, small as they were, drew attention. A refusal that could not be ignored, a choice made that did not align with what was expected. In those moments, the consequence followed. The Cruciatus Curse, used not in secret, but as a tool. He had known its effects in a distant way, through the absence it had created in his life. Now, he experienced it directly, not with the same duration, not with the same intent as what had been done to his parents, but with enough force to make its purpose clear. Pain, sharp and immediate, moved through him. It did not arrive gradually. It did not allow for preparation. It overtook thought, replaced it with sensation, with the simple and overwhelming need for it to stop. In those moments, there was no space for reflection, no ability to hold on to anything beyond the present experience. And then it ended. The absence of pain did not bring relief in the way one might expect. It left something behind, a memory that did not fade quickly, a trace that remained even as the body returned to stillness. Neville did not speak of it. He did not seek acknowledgement, nor did he attempt to frame the experience in a way that made it easier to carry. He accepted it, not because it was acceptable, but because it was part of what he had chosen. This choice defined his days. He continued to act, to support others, to maintain the quiet resistance that had formed. Each action carried the understanding that consequence might follow. That pain was not a possibility, but an expectation, and still, he did not stop. The others began to see this, not in a way that required explanation, but in the consistency of his actions. He did not withdraw after punishment. He did not alter his behavior in a way that suggested he would avoid future consequences. Instead, he remained steady, his responses unchanged. This steadiness created something unexpected. It shifted how others saw him, not as the student who struggled, not as the one who hesitated, but as someone who endured. The difference was not immediate, not marked by a single moment of recognition. It formed gradually, through observation, through the accumulation of actions that did not align with the perception that had once defined him. Neville did not seek this change. He did not act for recognition, nor did he adjust his behavior in response to how others viewed him. The shift occurred independently, shaped by the reality of what he was doing, rather than by intention. He became a point of reference, not for perfection, not for strength in the traditional sense, but for persistence. The ability to continue despite what might follow, to act without the assurance that it would lead to success or even safety. The castle remained unchanged in its structure. The Carrows continued their methods, the environment still shaped by fear and control. But within that environment, the presence of resistance grew stronger, not in scale, but in consistency. Neville stood within that consistency. Each day, each action, each consequence reinforced what had already begun to form. The quiet endurance that had defined him had become something more visible, something that extended beyond his internal experience into the world around him. Pain did not disappear. Fear did not vanish, but neither of them dictated his actions in the way they once had. There were moments, brief and unspoken, where exhaustion appeared. Not physical alone, but something deeper. The weight of continuous effort, of acting without certainty, of carrying responsibility without clear outcome. These moments did not last long, but they were present, part of the reality he moved through. And still, he continued. Not because it was easy, not because he believed it would end quickly, but because stopping did not align with what he had come to understand. That endurance, once internal, had become external. That the quiet strength he had developed in isolation now existed within a larger context, shaping not only his own path, but the paths of those around him. He was no longer only responding to the world, he was influencing it. And though that influence remained quiet, though it did not announce itself in a way that could be easily seen, it was there, steady, unyielding, a presence that did not break, even when everything around it was designed to make it do so. The night did not begin with noise. It gathered slowly, like so many other changes had, through movement that did not yet reveal its full meaning. The castle, long shaped by control and quiet resistance, felt different in a way that was difficult to name, but impossible to ignore. Neville sensed it before he understood it. There was a shift in the air, in the way voices carried, in the way students moved through the corridors. Something had begun, something that extended beyond the patterns they had grown used to. The structure that had held, even under strain, was no longer stable. Then, the truth became clear. Harry had returned. The knowledge moved quickly, passed from one to another in quiet urgency. It did not arrive as a question, but as confirmation. The person who had once stood at the center of events was now part of the present again, and with that return came something else. The beginning of the end. Neville did not hesitate. The years of uncertainty, of quiet endurance, of acting without clear outcome, had led to this moment without him fully realizing it. Now, with the path in front of him no longer undefined, the need for action became immediate. The castle, once controlled, began to change. Students moved with purpose, gathering, preparing, no longer hiding what they intended. The quiet resistance that had existed beneath the surface emerged, no longer contained by the need for secrecy. Neville was at the center of it, not by declaration, not through command, but through presence. Others looked to him, not because he claimed authority, but because he had remained when others might have withdrawn. He had endured, and that endurance now shaped how they moved forward. The preparations were brief. There was no time for careful planning, no space for extended discussion. The battle was coming, and it would not wait for certainty. Each person understood this in their own way, responding as they could. Neville responded by stepping forward. He moved through the castle with purpose, guiding others where he could, offering direction not through force, but through clarity. The hesitation that had once defined him did not disappear, but it no longer held him in place. He acted. The first signs of the battle came as movement. Figures entering the castle, the presence of Death Eaters no longer concealed. The space that had once been defined by control now became something else entirely. Open conflict, immediate and unavoidable. Neville stood within it. The spells he cast were not perfect. They did not carry the precision of those who had mastered their abilities. But they were real, shaped by intention, by the need to respond. He did not step back, did not retreat into observation. He remained. The castle itself seemed to respond, walls shifting, spaces opening and closing, the familiar structure altered by the force of what was happening within it. The battle did not follow a single path. It spread, moving through corridors, across rooms, shaping itself around those who fought within it. Neville moved through this uncertainty with the same steadiness he had developed over time. He did not attempt to control the larger movement. He focused on what was in front of him, on the immediate need, on the presence of those around him. There were losses. Not all who stood with him remained. The reality of the battle did not allow for protection, did not shield those who fought from consequence. Neville felt this, though not always in the moment. The awareness came in fragments as the battle continued, as the space around him changed, and still he continued. The The moment came when the battle paused, not in its entirety, but in a way that shifted its focus. Voldemort stood before them, his presence commanding attention, drawing the conflict into a single point. Neville did not step away. He stood among the others, aware of the weight of the moment, of what it represented. The years of uncertainty, of resistance, of endurance, all converged here, in a space where the outcome would define what came next. Voldemort spoke. His words carried certainty, shaped by belief in his own power, in the inevitability of his control. He offered submission, framed as necessity, as the only path that would avoid further loss. Neville listened. The fear that had once shaped his responses was present, but it did not define him. The presence of Voldemort, the force of his voice, the weight of the moment, all of it existed within Neville's awareness, but so did something else. The understanding of what had come before, his parents, the years of absence, the quiet endurance, the pain that had shaped his life, the resistance within the castle, the actions taken despite consequence, the people around him, those who had stood, who had continued, who had refused to yield. All of it remained. And in that moment, Neville stepped forward. The movement was simple, not dramatic, not driven by certainty of success, but by the same quiet resolve that had carried him through everything that had led to this point. He spoke. His words did not carry the force of authority, nor the confidence of someone who believed they could change the outcome alone, but they were clear, shaped by belief rather than doubt. He did not accept what was being offered. The response was immediate. Voldemort acted, his power directed toward Neville in a way that could not be mistaken. The consequence of defiance, delivered without hesitation, and yet Neville remained. Even as the situation intensified, even as the danger became absolute, he did not withdraw. The fear was there, but it did not control him. The pain, the risk, the certainty of consequence, all of it existed, and still he stood. The final act came not as a culmination of strength, but as a continuation of what had always defined him, the sword, appearing not as something summoned through mastery, but as something that responded to need. Neville took it, not with the certainty of someone who had trained for this moment, but with the understanding that it had arrived for a reason. Nagini, the final piece of something larger, something that had to end for the battle to conclude. Neville did not hesitate. The act was swift, not perfect, not shaped by precision, but by intention. The strike, the result, the end of something that had carried weight beyond its immediate presence. The moment passed, the battle shifted, and within that shift, Neville Longbottom stood, not as the boy who had once hesitated, but as someone who had acted, who had endured, who had carried himself through uncertainty into a moment that required more than he had ever believed he could give. He had not been without fear, he had not been without doubt, but he had not been stopped by them, and in that, the quiet strength that had defined him found its clearest form. When the battle ended, the silence did not arrive all at once. It settled gradually as the movement slowed, as voices faded, as the urgency that had filled every space began to withdraw. The castle remained, its walls still standing, but altered in ways that could not be easily restored. Neville moved through the aftermath without direction. There were no instructions to follow, no immediate task that required his attention. The structure that had guided his actions for so long had dissolved, leaving a space where the next step was not defined. Around him, others gathered. Some spoke quietly, their voices low, as though raising them might disturb what had been left behind. Others remained still, their presence marked by the absence of movement rather than by any clear action. The reality of what had occurred settled differently for each person, shaped by what they had experienced, by what they had lost. Neville did not seek out conversation. He moved through the space with the same careful awareness that had always guided him, observing without needing to engage. The castle, once familiar, now carried traces of what had happened within it. Small details, easily overlooked, now held meaning. He did not dwell on them. Instead, his thoughts moved towards something else. St. Mungo's. The place had not changed. It remained as it had always been, steady in its structure, removed from the shifting nature of the world outside. The corridors were quiet, the same soft echoes marking each step. The atmosphere, unchanged, carried the same stillness that had defined it before. Neville entered without hesitation. The path was familiar. He had walked it many times, guided by routine, by expectation, by the quiet understanding that this was part of his life. But this time, the reason for his visit felt different. He was not the same person who had stood in these corridors before. The room remained unchanged. Frank and Alice Longbottom sat as they always had, their presence steady, their awareness distant. The years had not altered their condition, had not restored what had been lost. They existed within the same space, unchanged by the events that had reshaped the world beyond these walls. Neville approached them. There was no uncertainty in his movement, no hesitation in the steps that brought him closer. He had been here before, had stood in this same position, had experienced the same quiet distance that defined these visits. But something within him had shifted. He did not expect recognition. He did not wait for it, did not search for signs that might suggest something had changed. He understood now, more clearly than before, what their condition meant. That the absence he had always felt was not something that could be filled, not something that could be restored through time or effort. It simply was. Alice reached for him. The movement was familiar, repeated across years, in the same quiet way. Her hand extended, offering something small, something simple, a sweet wrapper, folded carefully, held out with a kind of gentle insistence. Neville accepted it. He did not look to his grandmother for guidance this time. He did not question the gesture, nor did he try to interpret it beyond what it was. He held it, understanding not in a way that required explanation, but in a way that had formed over time. It was a connection, not complete, not in the way others might experience it, but real in its own form. A gesture that existed within the limits of what remained, carrying meaning that did not need to be fully understood to be acknowledged. Neville stayed. He did not rush the moment, did not feel the need to move on quickly. The silence that filled the room was not uncomfortable. It was familiar, shaped by years of repetition, by the quiet acceptance of what could not be changed. He spoke, though his words were few, not expecting response, not requiring it. The act of speaking was enough, a continuation of something that had always existed, even when it had not been returned in the way he might have once hoped. The war had ended. The world beyond these walls had shifted, moving towards something new, something that would take time to understand. But within this room, the past remained present, unchanged by what had come after. Neville did not see this as contradiction. He understood now that not all things moved forward at the same pace, that some parts of life remained fixed, even as others changed, that acceptance did not require resolution, only recognition. He did not feel the need to hold on to what might have been. The question of what could have changed, what might have been different, no longer carried the same weight. It existed, but it did not define his experience. Instead, there was something else. A quiet acceptance, not of what had been done, not of the actions that had led to this moment, but of the reality that remained, the understanding that some things could not be undone, but could still be acknowledged without resistance. Neville remained in the room for a time, long enough for the moment to settle, long enough for the presence of his parents to be something that existed without question. He did not try to extend it beyond what it was, nor did he seek to shorten it. He simply allowed it to be. When he left, the movement was steady. There was no sense of finality, no indication that this visit marked an end. It was part of a continuation, a thread that had existed throughout his life and would remain unchanged in its nature, even as everything else shifted around it. The corridors of St. Mungo's remained quiet. Neville moved through them with the same awareness, the same steady presence. The world outside awaited, shaped by the events that had just concluded. by the changes that would follow, but he did not rush toward it. He carried with him what he had always carried, not as a burden, but as something that had become part of who he was. And for the first time, that understanding did not feel incomplete. The years that followed did not demand urgency. They unfolded with a steadiness that allowed space for reflection, for change that did not need to prove itself immediately. The world, altered by what had come before, began to settle into a new rhythm, one shaped not by fear, but by the absence of it. For Neville, this rhythm felt unfamiliar at first. The need to react, to remain constantly aware of what might happen next, had defined so much of his experience. Without it, there was a space that required something different. Not action, not resistance, but continuation in a quieter form. He returned to Hogwarts, not as a student, but as something else. The castle remained the same in structure, but its meaning had shifted. The corridors no longer carried the same tension, the same sense of uncertainty. They had become, once again, a place of learning, though the memory of what had happened within them remained. Neville moved through them with familiarity, not the cautious observation of someone unsure of their place, but the steady presence of someone who understood it. The difference was subtle, but it shaped each step, each interaction, each moment spent within those walls. He became a teacher. The role did not arrive as a declaration. It settled into him gradually, shaped by the same quiet progression that had defined his growth. He did not seek authority, nor did he attempt to redefine himself in ways that did not align with who he was. He simply continued. The classroom was different now. Where once he had stood uncertain, measuring each action against expectation, he now stood with a different awareness. He understood what it meant to struggle, to hesitate, to feel the distance between effort and result. These experiences did not set him apart from his students. They connected him to them. He taught with patience, not as a method, but as a reflection of what he had needed himself. He allowed space for mistakes, for repetition, for progress that did not follow a straight path. He did not measure his students by how quickly they succeeded, but by their willingness to continue. This approach shaped the room. Students who might have felt uncertain found a place where that uncertainty was not immediately judged, where effort held value, even when results were not immediate, where the process mattered as much as the outcome. Neville did not speak of his past often. He did not present his experiences as lessons to be learned, nor did he use them to define his role, but they remained present in the way he taught, in the way he responded, in the quiet understanding that guided his actions. The years at Hogwarts continued. Students arrived and left, each carrying their own experiences, their own uncertainties. The castle remained, holding these stories within its walls, allowing them to settle into something that would last beyond the moment. Neville remained within it, not as someone who had become extraordinary, not as someone defined by brilliance or mastery, but as someone who had endured, who had continued when stopping might have seemed easier, who had moved through uncertainty without needing to resolve it completely. This endurance became his legacy, not in the way stories are often told, with clear beginnings and definitive endings, but in a quieter form, one that existed in the way others saw him, in the way his presence influenced those around him, in the way his actions carried meaning without needing to be explained. He visited St. Mungo's still. The pattern did not change. The room remained the same. His parents remained as they had always been, their presence steady, their awareness distant. These visits did not become easier, but they no longer carried the same question. He did not expect change. He accepted what was there, allowing the connection to exist in its own form. The absence that had once defined these moments had become something else. Not filled, not replaced, but understood. This understanding extended beyond the room. It shaped how he saw the world, how he approached what remained uncertain, how he carried the past without allowing it to limit what came next. Neville Longbottom did not become someone without doubt. He did not move through life with complete certainty, nor did he lose the caution that had always been part of him. But he did not need to. What he had become was something quieter, someone who could continue, someone who could stand within uncertainty without being defined by it, someone who could face fear, not by removing it, but by moving forward despite its presence. The story of his life did not resolve into a single moment. It remained open, shaped by what had been, by what continued, by what would follow. A quiet progression, steady and unyielding, marked not by sudden change, but by the accumulation of small acts that, together, formed something lasting. And within that quiet continuation, Neville found his place. Not as the strongest, not as the most certain, but as someone who had endured, and in that endurance had become enough. And now, as the castle grows quiet again, and the echoes of all that has passed begin to fade, what remains is not a story of brilliance, nor of sudden transformation, but of something steadier. A life shaped slowly, through absence, through fear, through moments where the path forward was never clear. Neville Longbottom was never the loudest voice in the room. He was never the quickest to act, nor the most certain of his place. But he remained. Through every doubt, every failure, every moment that might have led him to step back, he chose instead to continue. Some are broken by what they face, others are changed by it in ways that are not always visible. Neville stood at the edge of both, shaped by pain that began long before he could understand it, and carried forward without ever fully leaving him. And yet, he endured, not perfectly, not without fear, but steadily. And sometimes, that is enough. So as you rest now, let that quiet strength settle beside you. Not loud, not demanding, but present. The kind that does not need to prove itself, only to remain.